Yes. Yes. Thanks for joining us. This is the Aspen City Council work session for April 4th, 2022. And today we are actually catching back up with a meeting that was delayed and technical difficulties took us down last time with the internet. So we're back to talk about our housing goal and the Lumberyard specifically. Welcome back, guys. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor and Council, as you said, a continuation of the our prior meeting on the Lumberyard. We are rescheduled here with the 75% schematic design of the Lumberyard. Last time we were here, we got through sort of the first part of the presentation. We were planning on just briefly recapping that and then continuing with the balance of the presentation. There were some updates in...
We're having audio issues with your mic.
Okay.
Are you getting a full sound feed from Chris? Because they're not getting it on WebEx.
Our new building's fun.
Hello?
You gotta pretend like you're in a hot dog eating contest and just inhale the whole microphone as dip it in the water first so it goes. It's very strange.
Check, check, check. Yeah, sure. Is this working?
But Paul, you had the other mics? Okay, and that is present in room. Can you check your mic again, Chris?
Sure. Is this microphone not working at all on WebEx?
Okay. Yeah, so I don't hear it in the room, which was the problem last time, and it was dealt with on this screen.
Let's check that the mics didn't shut them levels down.
Or I could move to this microphone if that helps.
We got you, we got you.
Affirmative. New buildings are fun.
Again, Chris?
Testing this microphone here. Is that working better?
Delightful.
So still going with the hot dog eating thing?
We have Chris
Yeah,
on
pretty
WebEx
much.
now.
Unfortunately, it's...
You have to put mustard on it.
Yeah, that's right. It's so gross to clean.
Okay.
So a couple of updates in your memo was that we've rescheduled the 100% schematic design update work session for May 16th. We are still working on some of the air quality study for you, which we plan to have at that time as well. We did have some preliminary findings of the transportation analysis, which were available in your memo. Wasn't planning to review those here, but if you have any questions about those, please feel free to bring that up at any time during the presentation. Otherwise, when we do get to the design presentation, there was a video that was attached to your packet, and the video is going to be one of the slides in the presentation. If we can let the design team sort of talk through roughly to the point we get to the video. After the video, we have a series of slides that relate to numerous project-related trade-offs that you've had to make in terms of decision-making along the way. And we want to sort of go through those one at a time. They relate to parking, character, numerous topics where you've had to make some calls, and we just want to make sure that or at least try to get an understanding from each one of you that you're clear on what those trade-offs have been as we sort of get to the point of making decisions as we go towards the end of this and move toward the 100%. Really quickly, I did want to share my screen, if I can do that, and want to go ahead and talk through a little bit of the decision-making that you've had to make to this point in the design process. So hopefully that is now visible on the screen. And just backtracking a little bit, it was back in 2019 when the City Council directed the staff to start the community outreach and conceptual design process for the Lumberyard. And, you know, we started in November of 19 looking at these plans, and you may recall these sort of density studies where we were starting to show areas of density here behind Mountain Rescue. And then in this plan, over on the mini storage property nearer to the ABC. And then we were starting to look at some areas that might be appropriate for higher density when combined. And we've come a long way from all these plans, right? Moving on from that November of 2019, we started to look then at different levels of density being applied to the site. We had a 140 unit site schematic, very rough plans here. Another 175 unit plan here, and then moving up to 215 units here. And the council told us at that time, we want to expand the range of density alternatives that the team is looking at. And so we were looking at a certain amount, and what I'm trying to point out here is we were looking at a certain number of units, a certain amount of unit square footage in these plans, and a certain number of bedrooms in each of these plans. And so I'm just trying to carry through the theme through all these slides of the number of units roughly, the number of unit square footage roughly, and the number of bedrooms roughly. And then moving on to the next point in design was when we got to, oh, that's taking a minute, sorry, to July of 2020, where we really did expand the range of density that we were looking at. We had a concept 1, which were these two upper layouts, and there was a 1A and a 1B. The 1B, again, was that roughly 215, 216 unit range, but a much higher unit range here at the 450 unit level. But again, you can see what that does to the unit square footage, up to some 325,000 square feet of unit area, 625 bedrooms. We had a concept 2, which was bigger buildings with more consolidated open areas, which starts to look a little more familiar with where we are now, but still isn't quite the same. Now you'll notice in these plans that there's a lot less roadway area, right? You'll notice in these plans that there's no parking on the surface, because for these 450 unit plans, for example, we hadn't fully vetted out the parking concepts at this time. We're looking at, there was a co-living alternative at the time that was over 500 units. And then talking about co-living in the middle of the pandemic was difficult, right? Because we were talking about people sharing some common area spaces. And so when we then took the next step and decided to go later on in 2020 to our next plan, well, we did still have a co-living plan, but we were zeroing in on this 300 unit range, right? We had a plan with 250 units total and had around 350 bedrooms. Another plan with concept B here was 300 units, which was about 230 square feet of unit area. And unit area is inside the units, inside the buildings, not overall building area, right? So the total of the unit area, 425 bedrooms in that plan. And then we did have this co-living plan that had 330 units. And we started moving in the direction of roughly the 300 units. I think, Tori, around that time, correct me if I'm wrong, you were 300 to 325-ish when we started going to the next plan. And so At the end of 2020, or at least in our last work session on this topic, our plan had 310 units. We had 448 bedrooms and 240,000 square feet of unit area. And this was sort of our jumping off point to the conceptual design process, right? So from here, we sort of said, okay, we know we've got some difficulty with the 100% underground parking. Council was struggling with 100% underground parking. Some of the tight spaces in between these buildings. And when we brought on our full architect and engineering team to do our schematic design process, that was the first thing we set out to do, was to solve some of the challenges that council pointed out in this plan, primarily by starting with a parking alternatives analysis, where we started to look at how can we now bring some of that parking back to the surface so that we're not 100% parked underground. We looked at 4 different plans that had basically 4 different approaches to this, and during this meeting, the suggestion was, you know, is it okay for us to bring all 4 of these plans out to what at the time was our 4th round of community outreach, right? And start to test these plans with people. These had varying degrees of underground parking. The hinge site concept, for example, in the lower right-hand corner was 60% underground parking. Pivot in the upper right-hand corner was 72% underground parking. The latch concept was 81% underground parking. And we had the flange concept with 0% underground parking. But the important thing to look at here is we've added a bunch of access roads now, which wasn't in the prior plans, right? And so in order to access the above ground parking, we need a way to get to that stuff, right? So after we took the next step of bringing these plans out to the community outreach, we came back to you in January of this year, and somewhat with refinements to those plans. And we also at the time had the EPS market study report. And the EPS market study report had sort of a base recommendation in terms of what the program should look like in terms of a recommendation. But then it had an alternate where they were adding more 3-bedroom units, converting a lot of the, we also talked at the time about the studio units, right? And we essentially made the choice to convert a lot of the studios into 1-bedrooms and into 2-bedrooms, and we added some 3-bedrooms, right? So now we're adding roadways so that we can access the above-ground parking. We're adding a bunch of unit area by adding more bedrooms to the plan. And so we wanted to evaluate those 4 different plans, and you might recall that we used this tool that we called our matrix. That's right. And you know, it was through these numerous different categories that we were looking at: community connection, sustainability, pedestrian friendly, living well. A lot of the livability criteria that we talk about as some of the baseline goals of implementing housing that's going to work for the community, right? We added these categories related to construction costs, operations, and maintenance in terms of implementability, right? Some measure of, you know, which plan will be best, if you will, in terms of operation and maintenance, construction cost. And so the decision was made to start to move forward with the hinge plan, and we showed you some of these renderings. I think we mostly showed you this rendering on the bottom, but we did have some other colors. But it was really the height and the way that height was presenting that council had some challenges with. We pointed out some areas, some challenge areas on this plan. related to just areas where, difficult engineering areas, where we have some tight areas on the site that we'll have to deal with. At this point, we did know that everything was 4-story massing. There was a lot of attention brought to those open, consolidated green spaces, and a lot of folks liked those open green spaces and those opportunities for livability. We had 286,000 square feet of unit area at this point, which, remember, we started the schematic design process with 240,000 square feet of unit area. So we keep adding roadways to access our now above-ground parking. We keep adding unit area. And so this is coming out of a desire to do as much as possible for the housing crisis, right? And so trying to get as much out of this site as we can. And I think you've done a good job of pushing that envelope as far as trying to get as much out of it as you can. And so in our prior work session that got cut short and our work session today, we're looking at these two alternatives. We did get through presenting to you the 310-unit plan, which has 492 bedrooms. And the thing about the 310-unit plan with 492 bedrooms, that's 44 more bedrooms than when you started the schematic design process. When you finished conceptual design, you had 44 fewer bedrooms, and you had all 100% underground parking. Now with this 310-unit plan, you have 44 more bedrooms, and you have 43% above ground parking. So I think you've done a good job of pushing the envelope in terms of how much you can get out of this site, right? 267 square feet, 267,000 square feet of unit area in this plan, and again, all 4-story masses. So what the team is going to do is they're going to quickly, again, rehash that 310-unit plan, and then introduce one of the things you asked for, which was a recommendation from the design team, which they're calling the elbow room plan, which attempts to, I'm going to backtrack real quickly one slide, which attempts to address some of these challenge areas that we had pointed out, and we will continue to point out. So the elbow room plan has 266 units, so a unit reduction, but it has 436 bedrooms, which is only 12 fewer bedrooms than when you started this schematic design process. So the cost is 12 bedrooms. But the gain is more livability, more space, giving us more wiggle room in terms of implementation, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. The 310-unit plan has some challenges in implementation. When you've got no room for engineering, sometimes that makes for implementation challenges. But focusing here more on, you've brought 43% of the parking to the surface. You've provided fire access roads throughout. You've saved some $10+ million in bringing that parking to the surface, mitigated, almost half of those impacts of that 100% underground parking. So progress has been made in terms of the goals that you set out to try to accomplish in this schematic design process. The total unit area here, 233,000 square feet, which is roughly spot on to where you started the schematic design process. And so moving on to this rendering, we know we have the 4-story facades along the frontage of buildings 1 and 3, right? And so part of what the elbow room plan will do, and they'll show it to you, it does some stepping back of the 4th level masses on buildings 1 and 3. Now the rendering you're looking at is building 2. It's behind Mountain Rescue. So the elbow room plan doesn't propose to modify the upper level of that building 2 that's shown there, because that will be behind Mountain Rescue, a little further back, and somewhat shielded by the Mountain Rescue building. Buildings 1 and 3, well, they'll show you what they've done to buildings 1 and 3 in the elbow room plan. And so the highlighting that I have here in the upper left is pointing to the unit mix in the base EPS program recommendation, 46% one-bedrooms, 39 twos, and 15% threes. What I did want to point out is that the elbow room plan is really close to that base EPS recommendation in terms of the mix, 47% ones, 42% twos, and 11% threes. So a little bit less threes. Tori, I think in our last work session that got cut short, you had some questions about, you know, what is the target audience of the lifestyle that's going to be here? You know, you can see here that 11% three-bedroom units. You know, it's more of a mix of the 1 and 2 bedrooms. And also, we still have the 310-unit plan to consider, which has more one-bedrooms, has about the same number of 2 and 3 bedrooms. So the 310-unit plan really is more focusing on adding those one-bedroom units. But I just wanted to point out kind of where we've come from in terms of the flow of this schematic design process. So kind of in summary, you know, we started looking at some of those plans in 2020, the 140 up to 215 unit range. In July of 2020, the 216 up to 450. But really, I want to focus on, at the end of conceptual design, you had 448 bedrooms. And if you go all the way to the bottom of this column on the right, which is where we've come in the schematic design process, and you look at the number of bedrooms, you've got the 310 plan has 492 bedrooms, so far lower right here, and the 266 unit plan has 436 bedrooms. And if you look back real quick to that where we ended off conceptual design, so you're straddling that number of bedrooms, if you will. The 310 unit plan has a little bit more, and the 266 plan has a little bit fewer. So I think regardless of the decision that you guys make today, these are good decisions. There's been a lot of progress made throughout this process. You've accomplished some of the goals that you set out to accomplish in this schematic design process, goals that you laid out from the beginning. And you've ended up with 2 good choices, right? Both right near that bedroom count where you were when you started the process, one a little bit more bedrooms, one a little bit less. And so that was all I had in terms of sharing my screen. I just wanted to point out that really what the aim of the presentation today is to make sure that everybody's clear on the trade-offs they're making, whether you choose one way or the other. And a lot of progress has been made, whether you choose one way or the other. And as we go forward, again, 100% schematic design is not the end of the line. It's going to be sort of a jumping off point for our development application, right? But there's still room for some modifications, right? But I think at this point it is safe to say that we really don't have a lot of room to start just like moving stuff around the site at this point and doing like course adjustments. It's really kind of meant to be, after this decision point here and moving forward, it's going to be fine adjustments from that point. I just want to make sure that you understand that you've already made a lot of progress. And unless there's any questions, I just want to turn it over to the design team.
Ready. Do you have the associated parking numbers? Can you share those? What was your, yeah,
We will show.
In both,
Yeah,
okay.
They will.
show that.
both?
I was intentionally not showing parking because one of the things that we did throughout each one of those steps, and especially during that parking alternatives analysis, we were focusing heavily on the parking. And so I want to be clear that while we were focusing heavily on the parking, some of those bedroom counts were moving around, that overall unit area was moving around, And we were busy paying attention to the parking because it was important, right? And trying to right-size the amount of underground parking. But we'll recover the amount of parking that we have both above ground and below ground in both of these plans today.
There's a specific slide that goes through those details, and we'll go through that in detail.
Come apart.
Oh, okay. Well, Chris was referring to that. So when we go through at the very end, we're going to go through kind of each of these implications. We call them inflection points. And we're asking a question at the end of each one of those segments. So we'd really like to get reaction and get answers to those so we could all be confident and be clear as we accept and make a decision about how to move forward, that those implications are understood. That if we make those decisions, then that's the path forward.
Groovy.
Okay. So we're going to run through the first bit of this quickly because it's a recap, and Chris just did an incredible job of really reminding us all about the path to get to here today. So Charlie, we can kind of move through these pretty quick. So this one, we go back just for a sec, just as a recap of what we covered in the back in February when we were presenting for the first time any kind of real architectural image. And we were focusing on some very specific questions about are the images and the direction that we're proposing meeting your expectations in terms of livability and character. And so then we went through a number of questions, and at the end of all that, we came away with a clear request from you all for us to come up with our recommendation, because you recognized that potentially because we've been answering the question that had been asked, maybe the question needed to be asked differently, meaning take a look at the unit count, take a look at related parking, things like that. So that's what we've talked, that's what we have done. We started to get into that a couple weeks ago when we were here, but we're going to get into that in earnest tonight. So again, with the task at hand, we're taking another look at and reconsidering the 310 unit count as well as the parking. So where we're at today is to really focus in on reminding and just showing, again, the implications associated with the 310 unit count and the 432 parking spaces, showing that we've got life safety addressed throughout the entire site. That was something that was a new element that got introduced related to fire access around all the buildings. We've got 100% of the units being accessible, accessed. We're pursuing the highest sustainability goals that the city has looked at achieving. And we're focused in on looking at the unit count and recognizing that we can deliver unit counts and bedroom counts in a couple of different ways. So we're going to give you those breakdowns. So we're going to show you, and we showed you last time, what it looks like to stay the course with the 310, and we're going to focus on this elbow room scheme. So the important thing about the timeline is that we recognize that we've got very specific topics to cover tonight, and that's why we're going to be asking questions and looking for a very specific direction, a singular direction coming out of tonight's meeting, because that's the only way for us to stay on track, stay on schedule, and be able to deliver into the next step, which would be design development. So we'll be back on May 16th with 100% set. With the visions that we've talked about a number of times in all the other meetings, I just wanted to emphasize that we agree and understand that in order to have a strong and diverse year-round community that has a viable and healthy local workforce, this type of project is critical. And this type of project will help. The vision statement that we've repeated a number of times, we still think is just so critical because we keep looking back to it to make sure we're on track, to provide a stable, thriving, affordable neighborhood that's pedestrian-friendly, environmentally sustainable, it's connected, welcoming, that looks, lives, and feels authentically Aspen. Related to connected community, we know that it's central to it being to the well-being and the contentment in day-to-day life. So the whole idea about everything connected, the streets, the sidewalks, the trails, it's just central to this design. Related to sustainability, we're looking at environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability. Last Wednesday, we had a cultural resilience focus group where we talked with some potential future residents and got their feedback about their life, about their wants, about their needs, about how they live. So their feedback's gonna further influence our direction forward, and we're gonna be reporting that to you next time we get together. The other focuses related to sustainability are energy, water, waste recycling, and wellness. All those details we've talked about in some other meetings, and we're gonna have a full report on that as well. Related to pedestrian friendly, we want to emphasize people over cars. We think that this is a neighborhood. This is a neighborhood for people. This is a neighborhood for people to be connected to the outdoors. So we're gonna get into some of the details about how those connections are simpler, more obvious, and more easy with some of the refinements that we've made. With living well, we really think that it's critical that people have the opportunity to thrive at this neighborhood, and that they get access to all the same benefits that all the other members of the community can get. And we think that what we're proposing does exactly that. And in terms of authentically Aspen, we know that the direction has to be rooted in and reflective of this place, of this culture, and this climate. So you'll hear a lot of that this evening too as we move forward. We're gonna, yeah, thanks. So the slide before that was just letting you know the timeline that we've gone through to get to this point, which we've covered quite a bit. And that the decisions that we're asking for tonight are absolutely central to us being able to stay on track and get to the point that we can start to move through design development and construction documents and actually start to get towards construction. This is our only chance to do that, to have construction starting in 2024, is that we get clear direction tonight. So again, we're pushing livability on the site related to a lot of details that we'll discuss. We're questioning should the unit count be reduced from the 310, and we're showing you the implications of that. We've looked at some different routings for the bike trail, and we'll talk about some of those details. You'd asked us to provide a more modern, unique design, and we've got some more details and more refinement of that. We're absolutely celebrating and accentuating the sustainable character of the site. And in terms of the materiality and the character of the building, recognizing that tying that in and making that a part of Deer Hill and its environment is just so important. And we think we've got some good images that help communicate the potential direction for that. We've also got some examples of how we're dealing with the perception of height. And we got some details about those approaches. So we're going to be looking at all those things, and we're going to be making a recommendation at the end of this presentation on the path forward that we would recommend.
Okay, so for the next several slides, these are things you have seen already. We wanted to kind of just give a brief overview as the context as we move into talking more about aesthetic and the elbow room scheme, which is where we were not able to get to last time around. Overall site scheme changes here, really just getting to a next level of refinement. The road coming out behind Building 3, which Building 3 is the one here on the right, the south end of the site. But really a lot of our focus last time was getting more into the buildings. So this is the stay the course plan. We'll show you this one more time before we get into elbow room, just to draw those direct comparisons between the two. They don't jump out at you on plan at this scale, so we want to have those side by side and really point out the differences and some of the benefits of elbow room. This slide was just highlighting that we can, working with the fire marshal here, being able to take out that road behind the building. That was something we were able to recently confirm last time we met. So I think when you see 100% schematic design, you'll see further development here, hopefully even a little bit more space donated back to building footprint and some of those public outdoor areas rather than roadway.
Can't stress enough how big a change that is instead of having a roadway there, right? Instead of having cars going back and forth, there's sort of, you know, a through pedestrian feel all the way up the hill, and just without being interrupted by cars passing through there. I think it's a major change.
Can I just ask one clarifying question? Yep. Last time you did this, it wasn't on the slide yet, but you had said you had gotten feedback from, I guess it was fire, that the sort of underlying structure was not going to be necessary, so it'd be even more pedestrian friendly. Is that still the case?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's totally correct. So what we'll do between now and next time we're in front of you, we'll have a lot more details, probably have some perspectives, and be able to talk about how that could be programmed with different types of activities. And it could be more kind of a Zen connection, right, to Deer Hill. We see that the grading could work very naturally. We see that there's less need for retaining walls and things that would require maintenance and ongoing operational issues. So we see that there's quite a few benefits from just the bottom line, hey, isn't it nice not to have another street and all that pavement and cars? So it's quieter. It's probably, it would be, you know, from a pedestrian standpoint, it's basically like living on a park.
Cool, thank you.
And this is the situation in both schemes we're presenting today. So this isn't something you have to choose on. This is just great news from the fire department that they can make this happen on their end. You'll see we'll play the animation a little bit later, but this was really just a view to help talk through how everything's laying out on site. You know, it's harder to understand 2D site plans. So we'll be showing things to you in plan, in section, in perspective, and even in animation today, just to help, you know, everybody processes information differently. So just making sure we've covered our basis and all
Charlie,
have a common
can you really quick
understanding.
just move your cursor to the carports along Highway
Yes.
82? So those carports there along Highway 82 are in place of the carports that had been back up against Deer Hill. So instead of having berms in that area, you'll have carport structures that will help to block some of the highway noise. And so just wanted to point out that those carports are there. And when you look at it in the rendering, it's a little more difficult to see, but this is the sort of top view of what you'll be seeing in the rendering when you look at that.
You know, since you bring that up, I just wanted to share, you know, I went years ago probably, I went out and climbed the tower to look over the site. I think some of you guys, you know what I noticed so much about it was when you're at street level, the noise is really lessened by trees and berms, and as you got up that tower, just the noise became more and more prevalent. I just want to bring that up because it was something that really struck me in my site visit.
Yeah.
And so we keep talking about these 4 stories, and I just keep remembering back to that climbing of the tower and how the volume just increased by the stair. So
when we get to the renderings that show the side-by-side view of the 310-unit stay-the-course plan compared to the rendering of the 266-unit elbow room plan, there's a couple of things that I want to take the opportunity to point out to you directly related to that
great.
point.
Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely. So this is the building program for the 310 scheme. We'll circle back on this as a comparison between unit count, bedroom count, and unit mix as we compare the two later. This is just that next level of detail.
I just wanted to point out a couple things on it, Charlie. Just, so in our thinking right now, building 1 and building 2 would be rental, and building 3 would be the deed restricted for sale. So that would be 209 rental units and 101 for sale in this scheme, in this approach, with this mix. So just like Chris had told us a little bit earlier, this 310-unit scheme gets 492 bedrooms. So just a couple of details about how this is all
Again, that's
coming together.
44 more bedrooms than when you started the schematic design process, right? And that unit area of 279,000 on the lower left, roughly 280,000 feet of unit area. That's about 40,000 more square feet of unit area than when you started the schematic design process. So,
And
added a lot.
And we'll show a timeline again later to repeat that. And then the other thing to add, Building 3 was a specific council ask coming into schematic design that at the southern portion of the site, that's where we look to accommodate ownership. So in terms of looking at the unit mix and what was appropriate for ownership, keeping it around that 100 unit has always been the plus minus target there at the south end of the site. There weren't, what we talked about last time with the unit plans was a focus that moves it more towards a regular module so that there's some efficiencies in construction and with budgets and even with your approach to sustainability, the less kind of corners, anything you have to detail around. Just a simpler building makes all those things a little bit easier, more effective. Otherwise, there hasn't been a whole lot of changes in terms of square footage and amenities for the units. With the latest scheme, we do not any longer have the 2-floor units. Not so much that they were inefficient with square footage, but the way they laid out on site, they were a little bit longer, so it created some problems with how the building was approaching those pinch points. So being able to take out some of the length was really one of the driving forces behind taking out any townhome units. And we will continue to look for ways to carve out a little bit of square footage with a conscious towards budget, but not without sacrificing any of the livability there. I'd say there's opportunities for fine tuning.
When we look at things like the details of floor plans, I mean, how much ability do we have for input there? I mean, I don't, if you'll go back one slide.
Yes.
To the 3-bedroom. I mean, I look at that and I see the 3 bedrooms stacked like that. I don't know enough about apartment design or condo. You know what I mean? Like you guys are so great about showing us some great renderings and stuff, but I don't.
You don't have to be. This is why we've hired a design team.
You know what I mean?
Right, but for some of you, we know the visualization of these units is an important step to understanding what you're advancing as an owner of the project. And so this is, taking into account the preference, not the demand, but the preference for modular design that has these kinds of choices that come with it. But those really details I would not expect the council to have to manage. It will eventually come back into a financial consideration potentially for you, but we're not far enough along really for that conversation either. Go ahead, Chris.
These units are similar to the units at Burlingame, the most recent ones at Burlingame 3. There are some differences. If you look on the far right-hand side of this page, that's the master suite. And so the master suite in a Burlingame would, instead of being on the far end of the unit, it would actually be on the left-hand side of the page attached to the living room area. Other than that, not many major differences between these units and the units at Burlingame in terms of size and the general layout of space. Now, if you compared this plan to what we did at like 802 Main Street, at the end of Main Street, am I pointing the wrong way? At the end of Main Street. The size of the site and the constraints of our buildings made the units less, we have these rectangular modules, right? But those units needed to be, because of the building area and the shape of it on the site and the proportions, those units were more like square shapes. Whereas at 488 Castle Creek, our units were more rectangular shaped. And so a lot of times it has to do with the shape of the building and the proportions that you're trying to fit on the site. And our buildings are kind of like these long snakes, right? And so it just happens to be these proportions are designed custom for the shape of our buildings and the proportions of our buildings, but they're also designed to maximize repeatability. And so that doesn't answer your question beautifully, but that's some of the rationale behind how we ended up here.
Mayor, the reason we're showing beds and tables and chairs and things like that, this is really our attempt at trying to illustrate things that most people can relate to and kind of understand the size of them and see that you could walk around. So it's really just trying to illustrate the usability, because people are going to furnish their apartment however they're going to furnish their apartment. But this is really there as a graphic signal of kind of, seems like it's enough space. And then there's code issues associated with clearances and accessibility and different things like that. And these plans anticipate and are designed around those things as well.
And we should point out there's storage, there's, you walk into the washer dryer room, there's storage in that room. It's a good sized room. In the master suite, on the right-hand side of the page, you'll notice large closet, extra storage space in there. No, the bathrooms are, fairly roomy. We've got bathtubs for, people who have families and need to wash kids. And so very flexible, addressing a lot of the things that we hear over and over in terms of livability. The APSHA minimum for a 3-bedroom is 1,200 square feet. I've asked if we can try to carve some space out of these 3 bedrooms. They are a little big, whereas the 1 and the 2 bedrooms aren't too big. I think they're just right. This 3-bedroom, we might be able to try to get some space out of if we need to free up a little bit of space within the buildings. But generally in line with what we're not great at it, but what we've gotten a little bit better at year after year after year at.
Okay, well, I appreciate it, and as Sarah said, we have a team of experts, so it's, I guess the only thing I just wanted to be sure that the, some of the necessities of the modular construction aren't necessarily driving all of the design elements. So for example, there's definitely feelings and thoughts about, say, somebody's living room abutting somebody else's bedroom, stuff like that, right? Because you'd have your loudest area of one home abutting hopefully somebody's quietest area or what have you. But so those kind of things, as long as they're being taken into consideration, that you guys have that in mind as you're designing and looking at layouts, then I feel comfortable with it. I don't want to get into those because I'm not prepared for that. But
and what you're bringing up is important. We have less issues with wall-to-wall unit partitions. We have more trouble usually with floor ceiling in terms of sound and vibration transmission from unit to unit, but still important. Also, these buildings are going to be, compared to buildings we've done before, some of which have been very good. These buildings are going to be highly insulated. They're going to be, designed heavily to deal with sound and vibration transmission. So that's partly by choice, and now we're requiring ourselves to do it under sustainability programs. And so all those things you bring up are super important.
yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, and really at the heart of why we're showing the units is to just instill the confidence. 1, we're in line with APSHA standards for sizing, and 2, we've thought through these livability issues. And just as an aside, modular, having those double wall conditions really helps with sound transmission and reducing it.
Thank you.
In same kind of thing with showing you the floor plans. The types of things we want to point out here are some of the hurdles with the concept design that we're addressing, and that's shown here with kind of the direct relationship between parking and the building over top of it. It's just much more efficient use of space on site and dollars when it comes to construction. Also wanted to point out that one of the things that comes up commonly with public outreach is storage, and making sure we've accommodated that to some degree near the parking, knowing that people have bikes, and that's one of the biggest issues is getting all your outdoor play stuff to your car and out. Whereas if you had a garage in a single family home, that's not so much an issue. So just helping out with livability. And then as we get into the individual floor plans for each building, we're showing the ground floors really to show you some of the relationships of, in bright blue, some of the leasing in common spaces, some of the amenities to these buildings, and also just how you operate these buildings. These buildings require leasing offices, maintenance staff, et cetera. So showing that that's accommodated for, showing that stairwells and trash rooms are well dispersed and not inconvenient to residents. Things like elevators that have a pretty high price tag associated to them. That's one of the advantages of the hinge scheme versus some of the others, where because we have only 3 buildings, there's less elevators. But again, making sure if someone parks on one end of the building and they have a stroller or a ton of groceries, they're not having to walk all the way around the building. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to illustrate with these plans. And that's following suit with buildings 2 and 3. I think one thing to note with building 2 is the idea with buildings 1 and 2 being leased, the kind of operations for those buildings doesn't have to be dispersed between the two, whereas eventually if building 3 is ownership, they need to have some of their own support spaces, so making sure those are accommodated, and we're still at a level that's not all worked out.
You know, real quickly, I think that this council and a lot of community members, you know, were reluctant about the large buildings. You know, and indeed, some of the early plans that we saw were much more broken apart on purpose, checking out that for layout. But this council has gone with these larger building models because efficiency, I think, was a big deal for us. I'm trying to remember, interior corridor versus exterior entrance. Chris, what?
People wanted the exterior, and it was one of the few things, but they also wanted the environmental stewardship,
Yeah.
et cetera, and so that was the necessary trade-off.
In the open space between
And
the
the
buildings.
open space was another
That's
real
it.
positive about
Yeah.
these. And I
I
guess
think we had a list for that.
yeah.
Yeah.
The Matrix, I'm told.
Yeah, right. The
We
Matrix.
spent some time on it.
Yeah.
Looking at all of those livability components, the sustainability, the efficiency of big buildings.
Yeah.
I don't think loving big buildings was one of the reasons why we chose this plan, but there was a lot of reasons to choose this plan. In terms of your net zero related goals, best fit there. In terms of casting large shadows throughout large parts of the season on the next building, and the difficulty that comes with casting shadows from one building to the next, you know, there was lots of reasons.
Snow removal.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'd say one of the biggest advantages, and one of the, I know the things Chris has struggled with at Burlingame is accessibility. And so that's the silver lining with corridors and elevators is every single one of these units will be a type, what's called a type B unit, which can be modified if you're not, if all those other accessible units are taken up. So there's some inherent flexibility and accommodation in that some of these broken up buildings don't have.
Thanks. I brought it up just, I wanted, council to be refreshed as well on our goals and what we're building, but also for the public record so that people understand why we are where we are.
Can you go back to the Building 1 layout again?
Yeah.
We had some interviews last week with, so part of your sustainability goal, the Enterprise Green Communities Plus certification, it required us to go through this exercise to interview some affordable housing residents who may become residents at the Lumberyard. And so we had a couple of luncheons last week with some residents from Aspen Country Inn and from Truscott. First of all, many of the folks at Truscott mentioned how much they like the management at Truscott and how responsive the management is at Truscott. These facilities need to be managed, right? And so the on-site leasing office is shown, but one of the things that people talked about also was desire to have the ability to connect with their community members. And so we've talked about the potential for some community room space. They also talked about, having a way to connect online as a community too. But at the same time, I thought it was interesting that the things that this team has known enough to put into this plan line up with a lot of the things that folks from Truscott and ACI told us this is the kind of stuff that it would be nice to have in a community like this. So just some reinforcement there in terms of the forward-looking ability of this group to sort of foresee that this is a managed facility, and it's going to need attention throughout the years for both the people who live there and the facilities themselves.
Chris, did ACI and Truscott, did they see this layout, these ground floors?
We had these big boards with us, and we pointed to it with a pencil. Not as high-tech as what you have in front of you.
The purpose of those discussions was really to try to draw out kind of the lived experience of the residents and things that would be important to them. And it was less about what do you think about the floor plan or something like that. But all those boards were available just as kind of background reference tools.
Can you share the bullets of the specifics of like the kind of top line things that have already been considered? And then is there anything that was brought up that we hadn't considered?
We'll have a full report. It's being typed.
Okay.
And we'll go through the program of all of these kind of common spaces in detail in our 100% SD presentation. So that'll be the next meeting, and we can go through those details really clearly and have more updated, refined floor plans that actually show kind of office space and things like that.
Okay, but none of the things that will be illuminated from that are things that you're going to want final decision on today.
We don't think that those details are as critical as the specific things we're asking about today. Thank you for asking that, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So this is where the internet started cutting out on us last time. Really, what we're trying to do as a design team is take our understanding of Aspen, of the Lumberyard site itself, as well as the overall goals of the project to define what our aesthetic are. And I know Giles has been integral, not only as a resident here, but as knowing the landscape context in kind of the history of projects, living in one at Burlingame to help us influence that. So I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that as we keep this up.
And its location is pretty nice in terms of it not being in the Aspen downtown core. This, I think, is an appropriate vocabulary for the Aspen Airport Business Center that we're going towards. So, we definitely heard from this council that we don't want to see a whole lot of what we've seen before, and we want to see something that's more contemporary, and trying to take my biased hat off as a resident. I feel what Christian Terrell has started out here with is a really great step in the right direction from an aesthetic standpoint, and a bold avant-garde, so to speak, I think was the term that we're looking, that celebrates solar panels. It celebrates what we're trying to do. And there's nothing like this that I can think of in the portfolio of affordable housing. So, Skippy, thanks for pushing us on that and making us think harder. But, you know, taking my consultant hat off and being a resident, I feel very, very proud of what these guys have come up with in terms of the skin and the cladding. I can't wait for them to tell the story. But yeah, in terms of its location on Deer Hill, which is in my backyard, you know, I walked up and down Deer Hill many years, lived there 15 years, taken lots of photos, and, you know, it's a harsh, tough environment up there, you know, and it's mostly a sagebrush community with some gamble oak. So there's, you know, the hues of green that you have. But what I was really thinking about, how can we integrate, obviously, the sage colors and the green colors? You know, what I seem to remember is this plant that comes up pretty soon. You know, it's in the middle of April, so to speak. It's called the balsam leaf arrowroot, and it's that yellow plant that comes up. And you'll see it on a lot of the hillsides that's similar around here, and you see them obviously hiking. They have these long leaves, but when the flowers come out, it's an amazing pop of color that we get between April and I think they start to go away in June. And it's sort of like, you know, that was one of the inspirations for the colors, as well as the Indian paintbrush, but you can see the red hue there. You know, these really amazing plants that rely actually on other communities, other species to thrive, which I thought was kind of a nice twist to what we're trying to do here. So the palette you see here, the greens through the oranges and the blues, are completely taken from Deer Hill's palette. I mean, there's nothing man-made here whatsoever. So I've just been feeding these guys the colors and the ingredients that have come directly from Deer Hill, and come up with that palette. Yeah. So and they've done a really great job of incorporating it, and you can see it in the renderings. And you know, so yep.
And so in trying to have the buildings fall into the hillside, you have to keep in mind that there's different seasons and different color palettes with those seasons. And so, well, it's never perfect. We wanted to pick colors from each of those seasons. And like Giles said, with some of the things that pop up seasonality, those pops of colors. So bring something a little bit bold in here and there, but not something that overwhelms the building overall. There is a lot of variety in the actual materials we can provide to accomplish this. We're trying to keep in mind how we start to layer things, what's appropriate in terms of maintenance, what is day one a reasonable cost for these materials. So trying to wrap that all in mind while still giving something that's grounded and gives some interest as well. These are ideas we've brought to you before, maybe with different images. I think it was 2 council sessions ago. But in talking about aesthetic building blocks, in particular to height in larger buildings, one of the strategies with 4-story buildings, knowing that that's a pinch point, is drawing the eye down. How are we drawing the eye down? So we've talked about horizontal and vertical articulation in past meetings. We've changed our focus versus the last time we were talking about aesthetic to that vertical articulation, stepping away from that front building plane. The hope is that at the ground level, what you sense when you step back upper floors is that only at that 3rd floor. So we'll point that out once we get into the renderings, how we've applied that strategy. The other is breaking up large planes. So this image on the right, it's not to say this is appropriate for Aspen. It's more an illustration of they are breaking up with color and with step backs in the building. Same as seen here in this example. There's breaks at certain point in the building. Even though it is one building, there's one parking garage below all of this. It's breaking up the feel of that building. And then the other thing that we've really been working with Giles' team on is how the appropriate relationship between sidewalk and the bottom of the building. And that's what we're talking about in terms of softening the ground plane.
Yeah, I mean, it's, it's trying to reduce the scale of the mass using vegetation, and it's, trying to make sure that these buildings don't look like they've been dropped out of the sky and dropped onto a site that's been graded, and it's, the landscape architecture component is integral from the beginning, and we're not just thinking, oh, there's some leftover space there that a tree can go. It's very deliberately designed with clusters of trees and things like that at critical points that aren't going to block people's views necessarily. And we're trying to reduce the scale and the mass at the lower level in particular. So we can definitely start to take care of the first and second floors very early on, and those trees will grow definitely to a 4-story height. So, yeah.
Well, the ground floor patios and the opportunity for entrances and activating that ground plane also just, it's an amenity for the apartment, for the resident themselves, but it's also just, it puts people on the street. It puts people in contact with their neighbors.
And we'll show you a couple of sections through the site that illustrate those relationships and where Elbow Room might do a little bit better job, or at least universally does a better job than our 310 scheme. Our next building block, and there's going to be 2 here. The first is passive solar. So these, when we talk about passive and active systems are taking advantage of just the inherent building design. Probably the one you're most familiar with is building orientation. You orient windows towards the south, you gain a lot of heat, both winter and summer. So how do you take advantage of that? And then how does that inform what the building looks like? To illustrate that, on the left side are just 2 examples of the one on the top left. That is dealing more with southern sun. Because it's higher in the sky or lower in the winter months, you deal with that with horizontal shading. Whereas eastern and western sun, it is either setting or rising. It's lower in the sky. It's impossible to control that with horizontal lines because it's peaking between them. So what we're seeing on the right side, this is specific to Aspen and to your winter and summer solstice. And it's recognizing that if we really want to push the envelope on our energy usage, we want to welcome in sun during the winter, use that to help heat our units, and then during the summer, we want to shade those same windows. And so you can see the difference here with just 2 vertical fins. Winter, it's allowing most of that window to be exposed to the sun. Summer, it's blocking most of the window. And then with our east and west facing, it's using a combination of a vertical fin and a little bit of a wraparound horizontal fin, and that's acknowledging that we have some faces that are not perfectly north, south, east, or west, so trying to accommodate those. But that's starting to build a language for this design, an aesthetic that is functional. So how do we take advantage of that? So the second half of this is active solar. We are actually capturing sun energy with PV. We know that we need quite a bit of it to hit our targets. So when we heard celebrate our approach to sustainability, my mind went exactly to this project, and it is just in your face what this building is doing. Is it the right approach for us? Maybe not, but we can borrow from it. So it's that idea of celebrating the structure of solar, making sure it's oriented in the correct directions, and then also using it to work with the massing of the building to break it up in certain points to make a big building feel a little bit smaller. There's also a lot of advantage in this in terms of our modular design. So having kind of a separate structural skeleton for supporting the solar system works really nice with the modular design. They're not competing there. We're not having to get overly complicated with the modular units and how we're integrating that. They play nicely together in the same sandbox.
While we're on that, early discussions sometimes brought up the idea of usable rooftops and even green rooftops. And in the last iterations, we've really seen all of rooftop being utilized for the solar. I just wanted to check in with council members and, just to make a note of that. How do we feel? Where are we at with that?
I think if we're gonna have exoskeletal with solar above, that we're kind of sacrificing green roofs, aren't we? Because you said.
Not universally, and we'll actually look at that in a little bit more detail with the elbow room scheme. With any of these, we do have rooftop terraces. They're on the third level, or they're on the fourth level, not up above on the roof itself. One thing I'll talk about is we will have some sort of mechanical equipment on the roof. We're looking at ways to maybe tuck that under the solar to free up more space. But with the energy goals we've set in terms of 75% offset, it's just inherent that the majority of the roof is going to be solar. Now, I think once we circle back with 100% schematic design, we'll be able to say, do we want to put some of that on carports? Are we able to? Can we shift it around a bit to create rooftop terraces? But once we get to the elbow room scheme, we've carved out some large swaths of roof space for exactly that reason, to take advantage of some of those building setbacks.
I'm
without
a bit
sacrificing solar.
skeptical of it, just because the experience we had right out here with the parking structure, with it leaking and having to redo it a few years in. So I don't know what's happened with construction materials since this was built, but it just raises an alarm for me.
I'll add to that. I've built a green roof before, and I think any rational builder would say when you build a roof and you're actively introducing water onto your roof, you're asking for trouble. Might take a little heat for that, because I'm sure there's new ways of doing it, but anyway.
Yep, so there's a lot that goes into green roofs. Picking the appropriate roofing material is the first one. There's a lot of layers that get built up into it. And then making sure, one of the biggest problems with green roofs is the ability to maintain them, and making sure you've accommodated that ahead of time. So what most green roofs these days are doing is doing like a modular tray system so that you can easily pick it up and move it off. And then we can also just look at terraced space, so not actually introducing vegetation, just habitable outdoor space that adds to what we already have on the ground plane.
We've done 8 green roofs in the last 8 years, and it absolutely comes down to taking the right steps with the right materials. There's been a big shift in the industry in the last 10 years, and a huge focus on it. I mean, if you think of the opportunity of how much green roof there could be when you fly over something like a DIA or something, there's just an enormous amount of green roofs that could have potential. And we've been working with a number of companies that we haven't had any luck with. The tray company, actually. To my knowledge, not one of the 8 have failed. We're still doing good, including the one next to the Hotel Jerome, which is the biggest one in Aspen. So, we're very proud of them. And, otherwise I wouldn't suggest
Some of the benefits are it provides some natural insulation, some extra insulation. It slows down water entering into the storm system, so in big rain events, that's a big bonus. The other thing it does is because it's kind of blocking UV towards your roofing membranes, it can prolong the life of your roof. So done right, there's a lot of benefit to it. Done wrong, it's a nightmare.
Correct. Yeah, it's a good summary.
Isn't the cop shop have a green roof?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
Yes. As far as we know, the parking garage green roof here is the largest green roof on the western slope that we have been able to locate, actually, given the size of it. So that has been something we've been keeping track of in terms of what does it take to actually maintain it, since it's going to stay in this state for at least a few years before there's additional capital funding in there. The second thing, though, more importantly, I wanted to just put this thought with the council, is that you certainly have the option for all this solar at this project, but you've also asked us to look at energy resiliency for the community, which would involve investment, possibly in much larger solar array opportunities. And you will need to think about whether it's one or the other or both in terms of reaching that energy independence that you've been seeking. And so as part of that, I just want you to remember that this isn't an all or nothing with having complete offset at this location, that there will be other opportunities for you to contemplate augmenting that offset through other potential partnerships. And then the second thing that I would just offer is that once this gets a little further along too, we'll start engaging to ensure we understand reflectivity issues, things of that nature, given the proximity to the airport, which might actually be the deciding factor we should prioritize out of all of this, in my opinion. And so we're, at the administrative level, are working with the airport director on making sure we understand some of those requirements or potential hurdles, so the design team understands those, and certainly they're not experts in the FAA requirements. Thank you.
And we are aware of the FAA, and there are just solar panel selections that aren't as reflective to help meet that, but we need to make sure that there's no issues there.
Some of the things that we've talked about with these solar panels is, we need so much of them that we can't really angle them at a steep angle, and thus causing shadow on the next panel and shadow on the next panel. So the angle of these is purposely designed for quantity, right? But they will need to be actively managed, just like the rest of the building needs to be actively managed, so that we can make sure that they're being cleared of snow, so that we're getting the most out of them as possible. We have talked about using a semi-transparent panel, so that when you are underneath these on the roof, it won't be totally dark, right? It will be light coming through, because in order to use as little energy as possible, we need to use heat pump technology. More than likely, there'll be numerous heat pump systems on the roofs of each of these buildings that need to be maintained, and providing some shelter for those heat pump systems and allowing some of that light to come through for the purposes of maintenance access are things that are being thought of, in a holistic way as part of this system. So haven't thought of every single detail yet, but a lot of those details are going into it.
Thanks, Chris. I just want to get Skippy's thoughts on this, because this was a topic that we were
Yeah.
talking about a lot.
Yeah. So, because John, you weren't here, I was a kind of big advocate for the green roof thing at the beginning. And my thinking behind that, a rationale, was really, when it comes to solving the housing crisis, units that we will build as the city, this is kind of our one big shot over the next decade. And we wanted to, it was important to me to get as much out of that shot as we could, but also to have quality of life and things that we care about. And so in my mind, having the green roof gave us the opportunity to have more building square footage, so more units, but not sacrifice outdoor space for people. They could just go upstairs and you kind of get both. As we moved away from the higher count designs, we have a lot of space on the ground now. And so, the necessity of having it on the roof, I think, has waned as a result of that. Disappointing to me, but nonetheless. And so if we don't need it on the roof for that, to have more buildings, then I think what we've landed at, which is really celebrating the environmental aspect and the solar and kind of showing off our values. And I think with this building footprint makes sense to me. Is it so cool to have some rooftop stuff? Sure, but we have 3, really, really ample, beautiful parks on this space. So given the choices we've made around building count, I think that what we have here is a cool celebration of values that are equally important to our community.
Thanks.
We recently met with Dan Bartholomew, the director of the airport. He spent some time with us, talking us through what we will need to do in order to get that FAA obstruction evaluation filed with the FAA. He was pretty confident that it will be largely an administrative step. But again, we haven't fully engineered all those details, and so there are still many different possibilities, but the direction here has been thought through to a pretty high degree.
Okay, thank you.
And so here's it all coming together. I think when we get a little bit further, you'll see kind of building 3 from Highway 82, get a better idea of how it's setting into the hillside. But you start to get a sense here of how those greens are used, kind of the backdrop of the building.
This is building 2.
This is building 2. This is just out of our view is Mountain Rescue. So this is building 2, more or less as you enter the site from 82. Off the screen to our left is that open green in the bus stop there. Some of the things I wanted to point out, some of the jump out at you. The solar and the intent behind that is pretty obvious. What's a little more nuanced are in the foreground, these tan-looking structures. They're doing quite a bit of things from our perspective. One is they're helping to break up the long facade. So you're seeing, hopefully you can follow my cursor. It's jumping around a bit, but intentionally breaking those up at the knuckles of the building, kind of mid-span of the building. To break up the horizontal massing. The solar panels are following that same rhythm, so the hope is that this feels like several smaller buildings. The other thing these are doing for us, if you remember back to the passive solar slide and that vertical versus horizontal orientation of any shading devices, here, this is western facing. So everything is vertical. The idea is that we're not necessarily taking scrap lumber from the site, but it could be. It's supposed to feel that way, that you're taking a bunch of board lumber and creating this element that has texture and a little bit dynamic. From the highway, the hope is that it reads rather monolithic and helps break up the massing of the building, but as you get closer to the building, there's a little more nuance, there's more detail. As you pass by, based on the orientation of these boards, the spacing between them, the way that light plays with it, whether it's daylight or light coming from in the building, those things change. We're hopeful that this can be built modularly just like the buildings. It can be built with panels and just simply hung on the building, and then really tuned based on the orientation of that building face. So if it's southern facing, using something horizontal in the same fashion but a similar design aesthetic to actually produce some results for the building in terms of reducing solar gain. Am I missing anything here?
You talked about the ground plane a bit. Yeah, just.
Yep, so we talked about softening the ground plane. We'll see some sections that zoom in on this a bit. I think what we want you to get from this viewpoint is that there are plantings between road and sidewalk, and then sidewalk and patio, and that there's a gentle relationship between sidewalk and patio that is welcoming and can be a front door for that resident, can be that stoop, that place for incidental interaction with your neighbors, kind of create community that way. Some other things to point out. Where we're having public spaces in the building, we do want to shade them, but we also want that transparency. So we picked this viewpoint specifically as there's a straight shot through the building, and that's intentional. It's to bring light in. It's to see Deer Hill from beyond when you're on this side of the building and close up where you might not be able to see over top of the building. This is also in the foreground, kind of the entry plaza, whereas you transition more to where the units are, the landscape begins to break things up, soften things a little bit more.
Create a little privacy as well. Yeah.
And then one of the driving factors between this design and the last one is we had a lot of kind of vertical orientation and striping of the building, if you will. With this one, the intention was to use a step out at the second and third level that at the fourth level then steps back from the street. So that's when you're on street level looking up at the building, that's helping to reduce the sense of scale. But in this case, it's also creating those people's balconies. So producing some pretty large personal outdoor space for really all the unit types here. And then trying to sprinkle in, maybe it's a metal finish, something that's a little bit durable, little industrial to bring it back to the lumberyard. But also to help break up sections of the building. So right now it's a corrugated metal, it's a gray, it's kind of pulling off the tree trunk of an aspen or a birch, that kind of color tone. It'll work well in the winter months, but it also breaks up the different sections of the building.
So just to interrupt real quick, I want to be clear, the material choices are not made, okay? But the intent of what we'll be aiming for when we choose the materials is, this is the purpose of those choices, right? And so the idea that we would use lumber is not predetermined. The material choices here are going to be very important in terms of maintainability and sustainability. So the intent is here, but the actual material choice is not necessarily made yet.
Great point.
Yep. And really, your feedback today sets us on a course. There's still plenty of decisions to be made, especially with materiality and how we actually construct these things. But knowing that the intent is right lets us move forward on that path.
Yeah, I'm just a little curious on the corrugated metal. I know that I've seen some faux old buildings that use a corrugated metal, and it gets to be oxidated and looks rusted and old, and that kind of adds to the mountain aesthetic. Is that what you're envisioning here? This looks pretty contemporary. I'm just curious on how that fits in.
So we've actually talked about a couple different things. One was we were curious what you were going to call out with the orange here, and the idea of the metal you're talking about is called Cor-10. And what it does is it naturally rusts and creates a protection layer at the top layer, and then underneath is protected from that. So long-term, a very durable material. It's not a very nice material to interact with in terms of you're up front to it and touching it. It will come off on your fingers. You don't want to have to seal it.
So I just came from the Burlingame job site today. We're using the Cor-10 extensively. We use it at the lower levels of the buildings to protect from moisture, in particular where we have snow piling, where we have snow shedding off the roofs. And you recall, snow melts pretty fast here, so what happens is we end up with a lot of dripping and dripping and dripping. And that dripping likes to bounce, and sometimes when the dripping bounces, it likes to get into materials and it can deteriorate materials. So we use the Cor-10 sort of as armor around the base of the buildings in a lot of cases. Those buildings, though, are in sort of more of a landscaped environment where you usually have like aggregate there around a strip of aggregate around the buildings and some patios. And that aggregate sort of catches that runoff and brings it into the stormwater system. So if some of that oxidation runs off with it into the stormwater system, it's no big deal because there's a natural filtration process and you're not staining anything, right? But there can be some times where you don't want that orange runoff to be causing an impact to your other surrounding materials. So choosing material would be very specific to the specific place on the buildings where you're going to put it.
Yeah, so long way around. What I'm showing on the building is probably more of a silver galvanized finish. It's supposed to break up the facade and provide a little bit of different of color, but it's whether it's pre-finished or galvanized, it's a very durable material. I've used Core-10 extensively, and exactly what Chris was saying. Even if you pre-age it before you put it on the building, it will drip, it will stain.
And part of design development, we'll be bringing in boards that have have alternative materials and pieces and parts. And so this is an aspect of very specific selections that everyone will have the opportunity to weigh in on and get feedback on. So we're really trying to, this is sort of a spirit image here, is this spirit and character and kind of feel going in the right direction. And then we can come back to you with all the advantages about multiple alternative specific finishes for these different locations.
Yeah, I'm just curious how that Core-10, is that what it's?
Yes.
Yep.
How that would fit in with what is contemporary here and.
I think aesthetically it'd work wonderfully, yeah.
And we're going to come back to this slide towards the end to get your yay or nay on how we're doing on this direction. This is a total manifestation of all the input you guys have given us from the various sessions, and find out how well we did in a few slides.
Big steps forward.
Yeah.
So now we're starting to transition into the comparison of the 310 scheme, stay the course versus elbow room. So just wanted to bring it back to the 310 site plan as a quick refresher before we show you the changes with the elbow room.
Yeah, I went over this at the last meeting in, I think, some detail, but I thought this would be a good opportunity for you guys to ask any further questions you might have. Again, this is the full 310. We haven't started talking about the elbow room scheme. We'll get into that in just a minute, but just want to give you guys an opportunity to ask me any questions about the site plan or the team about 310. All right.
I'm sorry, you're asking for any final?
Well, we're just, if you've got any questions about what's going on in the site plan, where the roads are, where the parking is, any clarifications you need.
Any high-level questions just to help you orient before we compare
Can you
one scheme
read
for the other?
This plan.
Is it
legible to you?
We spent a lot of time on it in the last meeting. We just weren't planning on going through and walking through in the same way. If that would be helpful for us to spend more time on it, we can do that. If the council has a general understanding of the 310 site plan, then we could move on and do the comparison and explain the other items.
Good, skip.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you covered this previously, but that the perimeter road would be wide enough for a bus to do a circular route?
More than
Yes.
enough, yes.
It's really the design issue for it is the fire truck. And the needs of the fire truck are greater than the bus. And the radiuses and all those things have been taken into consideration in the same way.
Unless, of course, you're bringing back Rafter's articulated bus, which we haven't seen in.
We've reviewed those things with the engineering department, so we've been having meetings with engineering staff who's been extremely helpful and participating in the process with us and helping to guide us with things like that.
Yep.
Good, okay. Go for it, Randy.
Yeah, so we just wanted to put these two programs side by side. So in the blue, that's stay the course, that's the 310 unit scheme, and then in green is the elbow room scheme, 266 units. So just reflecting on the differences with the 310, we've got 492 bedrooms, and with the 266, we have 436. So that's 56 bedroom difference and a 44 unit difference. So those are specific statistics associated with those differences. When you go down to the gross building area, comparing 479,778 to 4,302, 145, that's a difference of 47,633 square feet. So with the 44 unit reduction, there's also a 47,633 square foot reduction in that total project area. So that's a gross calculation there.
There's That's a big money difference
Yeah,
right there.
that's a dramatic impact on the budget, the initial budget that would be necessary for the project. So I think that's important just to recognize that that's an aspect of this.
Yeah, we talked about how, you brought 43% of the parking to the surface, some savings there, maybe it's $10+ million. That difference there in gross building area between the 310 and the 266 plan, that's about 50,000 square feet. That's $20+ million. Right
So if we look at those two things together, the savings associated with the parking and the different approach on that, plus this square footage reduction, that could be upwards $30 million associated with the impacts of these kind of decisions. The other couple things that we just want.
And funding being a constraint, right? That's a difference in implementability, right? So you'll need more money to implement the plan that has more.
In the bottom portion of the slide where we talk about the bedroom count comparison, the original concept where we started with the 310 units that had 448 bedrooms. And so now with both of the schemes that we're presenting tonight, the 310 with 492 and the 266 with 436 bedroom count, and Chris spent some time talking about this. When we compare the 448 to the 436, that's 12 fewer bedrooms, but we've got all the other benefits, and we're going to get into those benefits associated with the elbow room scheme. So we're highlighting these things just to make sure that everyone is aware that we're maintaining livability, we're maintaining unit count. We're maintaining bedroom count, even though we're proposing this potential bedroom unit count change.
So that's where Randy went through all those slides early on. Again, as a reminder, those are always our beacons, our guiding lights. So, we don't take any of those factors away from when we're redesigning and reducing the unit number.
Can you go back just
Sure.
to the side-by-side table? I'm just trying to make sure I understand the numbers.
Yes.
This one, at the
Yeah,
top?
that's it. Okay. And that is unit count on each one, right?
Yes, and so just if it's helpful, I could go through the breakdown.
What I was trying to figure out, so it's 32, 10, and 1 are the differences, but then in the other slide, I thought you just said we're only losing 12 bedrooms. Did you say that?
Yep,
Looks
so
like
down the
56.
bottom, you'll see that, right?
Yeah, if you go all the way to the
Oh,
bottom.
from the original. Sorry.
Yeah, so sorry, I was
I'm
just.
good.
I was just trying to
Yeah.
take it from when we
Just
started.
making sure I'm not seeing double. Okay.
So we started schematic design at the top of that chart there, the chart that's on the screen where it says bedroom count. We started schematic design with
I understand.
448 bedrooms,
Yeah,
right?
I got it now.
So now jump to the bottom two
I get it.
in that same column. It's 492 in the 310 plan, 436 in the
Yeah, I understand.
266.
Thank you.
Just one other thing just to point out here on the 310 unit scheme at 75%, 310 unit count with the 492 bedrooms, that's 44 more bedrooms than we had in the original scheme. So we actually increased in that scheme, the 310 scheme, by 44 bedrooms.
Yeah.
Understood. Thank you.
All right. So let's get into the meat of Christopher Everson.
We built this slide about 3 times, and we couldn't read it until we got to this point. So if it's not clear, let us know, because it's difficult to understand. The dotted red is the 310-unit plan. And so you can see where the buildings are closer together with the dotted red, and where the dotted red is also closer to the sidewalks.
There we go.
This is,
You just stole the whole 30 seconds.
no, and this is supposed to be your slide, so go ahead. I wanted to point out that we couldn't read this slide at
Yeah,
first. so-
this is a tough one. Yeah, this is a tough one. But yeah, we're essentially overlaying the two to show you the differences and the benefits between the two options. Yeah, this is one of the big questions we're asking you tonight. is to go with the 310, keep the 310, or look at the 266 as an alternative to move forward with. And so obviously the first thing is we've got a 15% reduction in units. We've taken 16 units away from building 1. We've only taken 4 units away from building 2 and 24 units from building 3. And do remember that the red outline, dashed outline, we have beaten up, shaved, shivered, shimmied, done everything we can to make it as workable as possible. So there's not much more wiggle room to make the original 310 work. But what we're looking at in the solid gray hatch is what we're going to get into. This is our preferred direction at this point, is 266 units, going through the units that we just talked about that were removed. And again, that's a difference of 492 bedrooms versus 436 bedrooms. And we've got another few slides coming up that will zoom in. It's a little difficult to read. But we'll just talk about some of the obvious ones that we've got in front of us in terms of the benefits. Obviously there's less parking required with the 266 option. We're actually showing in this plan the same number of parking spaces above ground that there is below ground. And we're actually at a ratio in this of 1.53 parking spaces versus the required 1.39. So less parking could happen here and could occur here. And as a result, we could remove parking from the basement or from the surface and create more storage for the tenants, which has always been a hot topic item. Anyone you talk to is after more storage.
Yeah, and another item that will come up is part of our sustainability approach. With the solar, there's going to need to be some storage and battery backup. And so there might be some of that space in the that maybe is parking now in the basement could end up maybe flexing with some needs for battery storage. And what Giles was referring to in terms of the potential for maybe reducing some of the on-site parking at grade parking is we've started to talk about this in some previous meetings, things like Uber pickup or food delivery loading zones, some of those things that I think we all think are necessary and important aspects. Maybe we pull some of that back from what's shown currently as just straight surface parking, and we get some of those kind of features folded in. So I think the point here is that there's some flexibility. There's some flexibility with this plan, and it could just be that what might be parking could just end up being more green space too. Not that it's active green space, but it could be trees instead of parking. So that's the point of that whole flexibility issue.
Yeah. So it gives you flexibility. Then obviously the shrinkage of some of these buildings provides you with more open space. It provides you also with more breathable distance between the back of your car to the sidewalk to the front of the building, giving you that more space. And that translates very nicely in some places to having the ability to walk out, even with some steeper grades, to walk out of your first floor patio onto the sidewalk and not have to at all move through, circulate through the building in and out, which we thought was a huge check mark on the livability standpoint of things. Being able to walk from your car straight into your onto your porch, back porch, front porch.
That specific issue goes directly to the feedback that we got from the community about the desire to have exterior entrances. So we've got some other aspects of that we'll get into in a few more slides.
And then snow storage being a...
Hold on one second.
I did just have one question.
Yeah.
I think it was on the next slide that you previewed, but it was definitely in our packet about some of the sun angle stuff.
Yeah,
Which, I mean,
definitely.
sunlight is a huge
It's a
quality
huge
of
one,
life
yeah.
thing. But I was just wondering, looking at this, the only area where I'm seeing buildings close are between 1 and 2, and it's sort of that half. So is it just that corner that, from the whole thing that is representing? And is that not I was just looking at it, isn't that a stairwell?
The backside there.
Yeah, like that half of the building's a stairwell?
Yeah, so there is stairwell here, and there is a unit and a stairwell on this back corner. There's a number of reasons for making this shift. I'll just go to the next
No,
slide.
all I'm asking is that, because that sun seemed important, but is that actually going to make any difference
Let's
to
get into
any
the
units? Or
details.
if so, is it just
Obviously
a
they
couple
want to.
units?
It'll make a big difference, I think, for a number of reasons. One is daylight on the unit that is in this corner, or I should say on this bookend. The other is trying to get more daylight on the ground there, knowing that's going to be a maintenance concern. Over the entirety of the site, our grading works out pretty well, except for here, because it's a pinch point. So this is to scale in terms of building height and the grade difference between the two. And so when you start to layer in sidewalks, stairs into these units, you can imagine how 21 feet is a challenge in that area. So it is daylight, but it's also having a space that transitions nicely between the two
I think
buildings.
the other important thing is the vista upon arrival at the site. As you come up to the intersection with that 47-foot width as opposed to a 23-foot width, your view through and beyond, through the site, it will be a dramatically different experience.
But your point's well taken in terms of the sun, but you've actually pointed out very correctly, there's a stairwell access point right there, and having the sun being able to melt that snow versus having it shoveled or be icy, it was one of the arguments I was going to bring up for leading.
Just did.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, and on the snow topic, we've been working with city engineering, very keen on lots of snow storage, lots of separation between the sidewalk and the back of curb. And the 310, we made it work, but there's very little wiggle room for additional snow storage in these big years. So snow storage is a big one that we're getting as a result of the elbow room concept. And then there's a few other items on your list about fourth floor.
So this starts, and Giles can speak to this as well, but one thing I wanted to point out is the specific difference in the relationship to the sidewalk.
Yep.
Stay the course. This is not the universal condition. In most places, we have been able to accommodate a nice soft transition like this, but with stay the course, there are places where it will be difficult or cost prohibitive to access that ground level patio. Whereas with elbow room, we can say with authority that this is the condition we can achieve with all ground floor units.
Well, and is the condition to the left, is that adjacent to the front of building 1 along the frontage?
It's building, well, it could be building
look
one
at
as
the
well.
plan?
actually.
There's a couple.
Because
places.
I look at that grade transition there, and we have to figure out, we have to bring this to implementation, and I look at that grade transition, it does make things more difficult in implementation also. It's not only livability. I mean, it's doable, but I more see that turning into a wall.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But can we look in plan where that occurs?
So we illustrated it here as one example. It's happening on building 1 as well. I'll go up to the overall site plan, and it was also happening here along building 2.
So it's just so much more livable with that. And there are no pinch points. It's no ooh, we could have done better. It's just, it fits, it's like wearing the right pants. It just fits really nicely with the
Before and after Christmas.
Just trying to squeeze in.
Some elastic waistbands.
So this slide is a great one to just bring this up. I was very, very much in favor of you guys and giving us your input, and you really have come back with exactly the information that I was asking of and hoping for. The sad part is how many units that we're losing, because there was no intention of just losing units for the sake of losing units. So, it's easy for me to say at this time, I appreciate what you're demonstrating here. And I believe you in the sense that it seems like good changes to the program because of how it's going to play for years and years and years to come. Last thing I want to do, and that's what I was asking about with the design of the bedrooms or the layouts of the apartments, is the last thing I want to do is put something in the ground where people really don't like it. And when it comes to your place of living, it can be somewhat small things that feel, that the neighbor feel. How on top of you of people are you? And that corner image that you're showing there really demonstrates exactly what we're talking about. Is it doable the other way? Absolutely. Does the corner of that building literally, and somebody's patio literally, come within less than 10 feet of the sidewalk?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yep.
So all I'm saying is I really appreciate what you guys have brought back. When it was a 50-unit difference in the schemes, I was taken aback by that. I would like to not lose that many. And I have some other comments at the end when we start looking at other site plan stuff. But I have to admit that, you guys did take on the possibly even uncomfortable assignment of making a suggestion like this. I appreciate it. I can't help but sit here and really lament the loss of so many units.
We anticipated that you'd feel that way. And so that's why we feel like these are two good options. And so I just feel like, I think we need to kind of, this is to my team here, pick up the pace and get this information. Because we've got a handful more of these kind of level of issues to go through. And then we're going to summarize with some things.
Let's do it. Let's
So-
do it.
Sounds great.
So the next series of slides is really looking at height on 82. This slide is showing you where we think it's appropriate to suggest reduction of height along 82, and that's with building 1 and building 3. These are where the buildings are in the closest proximity to 82. So this isn't just perception of height. This is like I think, Tori, you mentioned, they're right up against the airport in terms of those fourth floor units are going to be the ones most affected by that line of sight to the airport.
It's exactly what you were talking about, Mayor. It's the top of the tower. It's what you experienced. And so we're proposing that for those two buildings, that this is in that almost even line to where you were standing at that tower, that we consider eliminating those. And part of that is the sound issue, absolutely. And part of it is just a scale issue. And we've got some images to show you to explain that.
And so this is an illustration of building 3 in both schemes. So the stay the course scheme 310, and then the elbow room here. And looking at, if you did take that step back, there are the obvious benefits of height on the street, the noise from the airport. How else can we take advantage of that space? You kind of reduce that line of sight and keep the units on the back, and then you can make a green space. This can be communal, or it could be somewhat controlled by the units associated with that. It also allows an opportunity for these units to potentially be accessed directly from the outdoors. That's something we heard from the public. It's still accessed through an elevator and then outdoors, but it's direct daylight through your front door rather than to a corridor.
Can you zoom in on that plan that you were just focusing on just for a second? So you could see that you could, just like Charlie was saying, you could come off the elevator, come right out, and walk along that terrace and get to your apartment, then get to the fire exit, the stair at the other end. And along the way, those could be some common terrace spaces, and they could be set up as more directly related to the apartment units, so they could be little private spaces for those apartments, but this is just a concept. This is just an idea, and what we're showing in green, that could be green roof, and then the rest of it could be a terrace deck surface. So we'll show you what sections through that look like and how that's got its own set of benefits.
So real quick, though, that is Building 3, which is the building that is meant to be the ownership building. And so you would have a similar condition at Building 1, which would be rental. You may or may not want to choose to create those spaces exactly the same way because of those two slightly different uses. So we would have to carefully plan the space out. But the condition of removing the units from the front of the facade would be the same.
I just kind of want to understand the thought process. I mean, certainly outdoor terrace space that we use, people are going to love, right? I mean, and I can also understand how you would want to train it differently for ownership rental. I think of like the W rooftop, like they have the private owners area, and then you've got the kind of big party to the left. But if what we're saying is that fourth floor is going to be the biggest noise impingement inside behind the installation, you know, I guess I just want to understand the thought process of like, well, we're just going to turn it into a convertible and somehow that'll still be an enjoyable space out there.
Yeah,
Well,
so we talked about when we get to the side-by-side rendering comparison, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because you'll be able to see both the facade, which will help address noise. We'll talk about our sustainable building envelope, which is going to help us address noise. We'll talk about the use of the windows, which are going to be needed to help us deal with our building envelope for your sustainability, which also helps with noise. And then we'll talk about how you open, want to just go to the rendering?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I believe that we can make the insides quiet. Like I think of the 802 main building, right? We have Buddy in there, and
gonna bring
it's
that up, too.
amazing. Like it really is amazing. When you're outside and you're like, it's so loud, and you close it, and it's radio quiet. And I'm sure these will be even better because they're newer. But if we do want some sort of outdoor programming, how do we do that when
I was
it's
going to
outside?
bring up 802 Main
Yeah.
as well, because we talked about maybe getting rid of those balconies, right? We saw two sides to that coin, right? And we decided to leave the balconies there because when you open the door, you're making a choice to open the door to that noise, right? And when you close it, I was as impressed as you. When you close it,
Yeah, it's
it
very good.
shuts off that roadway noise because you're
Completely.
right on that corner. But you still have a balcony if you want to use it. And maybe it's off-season. Maybe there are different times when it works better than others. And so I was going to bring that up during the rendering portion.
Do you want to go to the rendering first and then go to the sections?
Yeah, we can skip ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, the section works as well. But so the point is talking to it in terms of it's not necessarily universal, right? Like you may want to go use that upper level space, but you are making a choice to step outside onto that terrace. You are making a choice that you're going to stand out there knowing that there's going to be operations related to the airport as well as the highway. So you step into that terrace area knowing that there's going to be some noise out there. And again, during different times of year, during different times of day, seasonality may change your ability to use that space. But it also changes, the roof line of the building. You can see in the bottom rendering more of Deer Hill above the top of the building because that upper level is stepped back, right? You can see how the eye is drawn below those solar panels to that stepped back portion where the passive solar facade is along there. That passive solar facade is going to help us shield noise additionally, right? That passive solar facade acts as the handrail for that terrace area. And so it helps to partially block some of that noise as well. And so our building envelope, again, is going to protect us from that noise when we're inside and we close things off. The terrace space here on the lower level, not meant to only provide that outdoor use and that outdoor access to those units, also helps to mitigate some of the massing from the highway, which we'll further discuss as well. And then what I didn't see when I looked at these renderings at first was at the lower level, you see bicyclists going by and things. You're looking at the carports. So those are the carports in front. And then those trees that look like they're sticking up out of the carports, those are sticking up out of the,
Those are street trees.
those are in our streetway behind those carports. So that's a little bit hard to read there. But it's to help with the massing. It's not, the primary thing here is to help with the massing. The secondary benefit is the terraces. Yes, you step outside, you choose to interact with that noise.
Thank you.
And it's anecdotal, but 10 years from now, electric cars will probably be more prevalent. I mean,
True.
And then 20 years from now, look, aviation's probably not that far behind. I mean, it's wishful thinking. We're planning for the
Far behind, but you're right.
planning
I mean,
for the
in
future.
in the
all right?
lifespan of the building. Although I'm not sure that electric planes are going to be quiet.
This
Have an
helps too,
optimist
though.
in the
I mean,
room.
this is the condition
Thank you.
Somebody to
with,
make thrust.
this is the condition with 310 units, and so.
Correct.
Sorry.
No, I was just saying that the auto noise is really generated by the tires on the.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. But it's a good point. I mean, we hope that is true, but
Yes.
for noise
Yes.
purposes. Yeah.
Making a note of what you just said.
Yeah.
The person
on record.
standing,
Sending you an email. Giles
person
said.
standing on the fourth floor balcony in that image has the same problem, right?
Yeah.
They want to stand out on their balcony, and maybe it's best to do that at the right time of day in the right time of season rather than spending time out there in the worst time of day at the worst time of season.
So this is a section through Building 3 out to 82. So it picks up how the balconies work, their relationship with the street, with the sidewalk, the street trees. You can see the parking. You can see the two-way traffic on the street. Then the carport structure. On the backside of the carport structure is the bike trail, and then the frontage over to 82. So we tried to organize this to show you just kind of how all those interrelations happen. And then on the back side of the building, you can see the opportunity for those patios to be on this nice park space and those balconies there overlooking that and looking towards Deer Hill.
And again, this is the 310, not the elbow room. We'll go to the elbow room next.
So in this section, same section, but just the building moves back a little bit to give the opportunity for the stairs to get up to the patio spaces at the first floor. You see that the fourth floor unit has been removed on the 82, Highway 82 side of the building, and that becomes this green roof, active terrace area. Also allows for outdoor entrances into those fourth floor units. And by the way, those fourth floor units still have their balcony on the side that faces Deer Hill, so there's no reduction in kind of outdoor space for them. But we think that section tells a pretty strong story about just how the apparent height of the building would be different from not only from 82, but from walking down the sidewalk or driving down the internal streets in the neighborhood. The solar panels also pull back from, when you compare the two sections, you could see above the fourth floor roof line how the solar panels pull back. So there's actually open sunlight getting to the majority of that roof terrace area.
How does that affect the overall solar energy goal? What percentage do we lose?
So here, it doesn't show up perfectly clearly because the building is angled at this point, but the solar is broken up, kind of creating this rooftop corridor for maintenance, et cetera. Here, it's pretty much the same amount of solar,
just kind of smush it back.
Yeah.
Got it. Good.
Also, just probably worth pointing out that the condition in the prior slide, go to the other section.
But I wonder if anyone will be out.
This is the condition that is in both plans. At Building 2, you would have this condition in either the 310
That's
or
correct.
the
Yes.
660. So Building 2 is staying like this in either case.
Yes, so the 310 scheme, 4-story faces towards 82 in all three buildings. the elbow room scheme, 3-story faces at buildings 1 and 3, and 4-story face at building 2. And again, that's behind the Mountain Rescue. And one thing I wanted to point out, Mayor, that in the initial acoustic study that was done, they took readings up at the tower where you were standing. They also took readings at the ground. And then they took sound readings behind Mountain Rescue. On the backside of Mountain Rescue, it was 15 decibels quieter than the front side. So our interpolation of that is the backsides of our buildings where these green spaces are should be at least that. It should be at least 15 decibels quieter. So this idea of this green roof terrace that could be at sometimes too loud to enjoy, there's a variety of outdoor spaces that some are quieter, some are louder, some are more public, some are, a little more cozy. And that's the kind of things that we want to really get into as we advance the design, to be able to show that based on your feelings that day or your personality or how many people you're with, you've got different spots you could easily get to and experience the outdoors.
Time to run the video.
Yep. We won't be able to enjoy the elevator music, and our audio guy put some sound of cars in here as well, so.
It was pretty elevator music for sure.
I noticed the FR86 is in the garage, so we've got enthusiasts living here, which is fun.
Just imagine the girl from
Just in
Ipanema.
case, just
I
in
always
case,
pay attention to what models. See, now we all have LR3s. That's very telling. This is
just in case
little
people are
details that matter.
watching, this is the 310 scheme, so this scheme does not have those upper level units removed.
That was an illegal U-turn. I'd like to
Yeah, exactly.
But
So this
probably
is going
really
back
fun.
down 82, going past the site. There's Mountain Rescue. There's a main entrance.
That
There's
light
the
was
berm.
totally
He
green.
went. He knows yellow, but I liked it. He
Green.
gunned it. I'm fine with that.
All right, so switching to the 266 unit plan and removing those upper level units on the front side. So slight difference in how you would perceive that from building 2 there, you can see stays the same as it was. Everybody has an LR4.
Drifting.
Yeah.
So again, just trying to give you folks as much information as we can in terms of decision-making.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
So to provide some clarity for the council, right now, this is presented to them as A or B. I actually think, council, you likely have a third option of saying you don't want to lose 56 bedrooms, but you're willing to lose 30, and challenge that back to the design team. But they will not come back to you again. They would take that direction and moving into their next step, and you'll need to trust their professional judgment in where to place those 26 bedrooms you wanted to put back in. So there's probably a little bit of room in the middle, and I haven't asked this question of any of them ahead of time, but I don't think you're in an absolute that you have to choose one or the other if you're feeling like there's certain elements you feel strongly about addressing, such as that space between building 1 and 2. But perhaps you're not willing to address building 3 in the same manner. So just as, don't feel too boxed in yet.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Which just illuminated my thinking. I mean, I like the rooftop, but I just don't think it's going to be used that much. But the front area on the ground level, I see the benefit in that. Do those necessarily come hand in hand?
No.
They don't.
No, so
Okay.
those fourth floor removals can just be
Separate
added
choices.
right back in. Yep.
Yeah, just one point on that. We thought that this was directly addressing some comments that we heard about four-story masses, and so we were trying to illustrate, here's a way to get some three-story, some very, very, front-facing, obvious three-story character. And that's the reason we're presenting it this way, it's that there are options here, and if those benefits were perceived by you to be enough, and that could offset the unit loss, then it's worth considering. So what we've got now is we've got these inflection points. This is what we referred to earlier, where each one of these are going to end with a question about these specific issues. So this.
Oh, no, I didn't want to cut you off. I just had one. I was going to see if I could ask one more question before we get into the actual questions. But you please finish. You may answer what I was thinking.
So on underground parking, we had gotten the feedback from 64% of the folks felt like underground parking was really important. And so we understood that. And we also were charged with investigating alternatives to 100% underground parking. So the current plan has 43% surface parking and 57% underground parking. That's with the 310-unit scheme. On the 266-unit scheme, it's evenly split in terms of the underground parking and the at-surface parking. So the elbow room parking numbers are there on the screen. So 205 underground, 114 in carports, 88 in surface, for a total of 407 parking spaces. As we described earlier, we think we've got some flexibility here that we could potentially reduce some of that surface parking to accommodate it in some of the ways that we described. But we think we've got a very balanced approach here related to efficient, effective, inside protected parking in the basements, and then some covered parking that allows for some storage, and then reasonable parking on the street for the remainder of the parking count that's needed. We see that there's value in the approach that we've got here with the parking, and we described it before as comparing this to the 100% underground parking. We see this as about an $11 million savings to the project, so we think that's pretty critical. So we just are looking for direct reaction to, is the approach related to parking, the underground parking specifically, that we're showing, is this a significant reduction? Is this a sufficient reduction from the 100% that had been originally started with? Are we on track and on point with our approach that's demonstrated in this approach?
Now I have a question.
Yeah.
So some of these conversations predated your guys' involvement, but we have had a conversation since you've been here. I think at least three of us have at some point talked about having a project that was, underparked versus standard, as well as no parking. And there was also a lot of opposing view to that, and some of that came from the community, so I get that. But, the last meeting, not our last half meeting, our last full meeting, even Rachel had come around and said, hey, maybe we should reduce parking by 5 to 10%. So I was really expecting that we would see some option with less parking, which would have the benefit of more units or more community space. We haven't seen that at all. So I'm just wondering if you can talk me through, did you guys have that discussion, and how did you come to the conclusion you did?
If 3 of the council wants to tell us to reduce the parking, we'll reduce the parking.
But, so at the last meeting, no further conversation was had on that, or I guess I'm just trying to.
So right now, we're parking per code.
Right.
So we have to follow that unless.
Absence of specific direction from a majority of the council to specifically reduce the parking.
Okay.
To a reduction, to a deficit condition, we've continued to fall back on the code.
Okay.
Except we did not continue to do that with a 310-unit plan. So the 310-unit plan, as shown, actually has a deficit. Yeah?
So we'd have to reduce the amount of storage that we show in that plan to gain back the parking that we had taken out by adding that storage in. So we'd have to balance that more. But you're right that when we kept revising the mix and added more 2s and 3s, the parking of keeping it at 432, it needed to increase if we're meeting that minimum code requirement. So there's a way to do it. And that would be to reduce some of the storage that we show in those basements. So we can do it. The plan can accommodate it, but it's going to be some trade-offs with personal resident
I'm
storage.
just saying that if the council did direct us to reduce some parking, we're already well on our way to doing that if you want to. But in the event that you want to go with the 310 unit plan, we also can make it work. So,
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarification, that the code is 1.39 parking spaces per,
I want to
Per
be clear.
unit?
yeah, let's be clear.
Yeah.
The code calculation works out to be around that 1.4 number, given the unit mix of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms that we have. So if you start adding tons more 2s and 3 bedrooms, you don't end up with the same number.
Right.
but I thought with the 266 that our number was 1.47 or something.
It was higher. You're exactly right. It's what Giles was explaining is we've maintained the surface parking that we had previously shown. We didn't go through a process of reducing that because, we acknowledge that things like the Uber stuff and the food delivery and accessible parking and some other loading zones and maybe maintenance parking, some other things that just make sense to do would eat into some of that, what appears to be additional parking right now. So what we would need to do is just what we would normally absolutely do between this point and wrapping up 100% is we'd confirm all those calculations and make sure that what we present in 100% is absolutely clear about its meeting the code minimum requirement.
So just so you see the gears meshing in my head on this, that if we reduce the number of units, our parking spaces, how are we going to enforce that and how do we allocate? Who gets what? Do we have parking permits for each unit? Do the ownership units get more parking spaces than the rentals?
So these are all things that the property management company would absolutely have to be faced with right away and get really clear from the beginning.
We would define those management parameters either for ourselves, right, so that we can hire management to enforce what we want them to enforce, or you might have, like we talked about, the city needs to come in and deconstruct the existing site. We need to perform grading, utilities, access, and infrastructure to get the site ready for development. While that work is going on, we can be soliciting for private development of one phase after the next, probably starting with the first phase. And we can write into our requirements that the buildings should be managed X way. And whatever X is, we write a scope of management work that for all of those things, and including other things that we haven't discussed, like dogs, no dogs, or how dogs, right? And so there's a lot of management criteria that we are not talking about as part of the design process because there's way too much. And all of those things all will need to be addressed, and fairly soon.
Yeah, and another gear in there is that I don't want to impact the rest of the ABC
Exactly.
with parking. So for me, I really see this is part of a social engineering, and I think that it's good that if we can do this, but the trade-off I feel is that you're asking for more government control. You're asking for some more trade-offs on what liberties that people have, and I'm not taking a position on that, but I'm saying that these, in my mind, are the the trade-offs that we have to make. And do we give reduced rent to somebody that doesn't have a car? Does somebody buy any unit if they have one car for a 3-bedroom? Do they get a reduced rate? So these are all things that I'm interested in pursuing, but it's got to be made. I came into this meeting thinking that we really have to lock in on the number of units, number of parking spaces, and we have to weigh this density and livability, something that we've been dealing with for 2 years now. I don't know what the right number is. I think 500's too many. I like the livability at 266 over 310. I don't like losing that number of units. And I'm curious, on the 4th floor in the building 3 and the building 1, how many units are we losing? Looks like we're losing more on building 3 because of the length of that run. But just curious on if we add those back in.
I figured that. Charlie, do you know?
So it's on building 1, 4 units, building 3, 10, and it is because of that length.
Could you run that by me again, please?
So building 1, 4 units right on the front there. And then building 3, it's 10 units.
We add those back in, we get 14 more units.
That's correct.
Correct.
Yep. But your perception of height goes up.
We talked a lot about continuing to add things. And those things continued to put sort of pressure on the buildings, like upward pressure on the height of the buildings. Green space, parking, roadways. And one other thing that's coming to light is implementation of the renewable energy generation system with our electric utility is probably heading in the direction of some amount of battery storage. It's not fully engineered. We're getting closer and closer because in between our last meeting and this meeting, we've had more conversations and more engineering work, and we will again as we get to 100%. But that space for battery storage, more than likely in the subgrade space, more than likely might need to be space that we take some space away either from parking or from some of the storage units that are down there. So we might have some difficult decisions to make as far as we hear over and over people want storage. We hear equally people want somewhere to store their car. We might need to carve out a little bit of space for like a battery storage room in each one of these. And that room may need a certain level of ventilation so that it can't be out in the open parking area. And so we might have to make some difficult choices about how many parking spaces to remove or how much storage to remove. And so I'm just kind of throwing that out there as a heads up. We're talking about making some, these are fine-tuning type things that we're doing, right? And so just throwing that out there as another choice that might need to be made.
So just with this specific issue, our bottom line question, and this really goes to either the 310 unit scheme or the 266 unit scheme, is this about 50% of the parking being underground, is that approach acceptable? And that's really, it's been consistent with what we've been showing with the 310. So it's just so we have confidence moving forward that in terms of how to deal with parking, about half of it ending up as underground parking is acceptable.
Compared to 100% underground.
Thank you. Yeah. Compared to 100% underground. Yes.
Yes. But I am also in the camp of I would love to look for a way to have either auto-free units or charge for additional parking, any disincentive, and I'd be interested in trying a program, something.
Mr. Mayor, we have experience with our other properties in exactly managing this. Burlingame Seasonal is a perfect example. Marot Seasonal is another example of where we control the parking. And so I'm confident that that is an administrative detail that we can handle, that we can just have some general policy guidance on. I'd encourage tonight for us, we really need to understand the underground versus above ground piece. That's the critical piece we need to know to get into our next layer of design.
Well, I was just gonna say, my interest in reducing parking has never been so that people who are already living here don't have cars, right? Like it's not to like make the thing worse. It's always been there's a limited number of square footage, and if you have less room for cars, you can have more room for people, and we desperately need housing, right? So we're not going to change the footprint. Well, I guess we might be moving it a bit, but if we stripped off all the parking today, for the majority of the site, it's not going to add any more people.
Units.
That's correct.
That's correct.
You nailed it. That's exactly right.
So my only question is because I would love to have, I still think that there was a better path forward here. But we're here, we're gonna move forward together. But I'm looking for opportunities, as you said, Tori, to test, at least to have an example of could we have a car-free community? And so when I look at this, I wonder, is there an opportunity that last sort of corner, that triangle up there that's sort of unprogrammed, if we eliminated those 15 spaces, could we get a small, funky 10-unit building there that is designed and intended to be car-free, that has, spaces for your heated bike gear and you know what I mean? Like just like to have the model, and maybe that can make up for some of the other units that I really hope in this conversation we're not going to lose, but I have a hunch that we're going to. Is that a space, or is there somewhere else that we can do something like that to at least model what the future could look like?
Yeah, I looked at that same triangle. That was
Yeah, okay.
that's
One
one
thing
of
I've
the things
always-
that I was going to bring up at the
One
end
thing
of
I've
this.
always thought would help a lot with this topic is actually, it's administrative, but putting a enforcement in place to not allow people to have, so the basis of the code is, 2 parking spaces per 2-bedroom unit and 2 parking spaces per 3-bedroom unit. And actually enforcing that probably would help a lot with, allowing as many people in 1 bedrooms as possible to be able to have a car. Because I actually think that what you're trying to do, by having some people in 1 bedrooms maybe not have a car, could be better facilitated if we enforced people in 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms not to have more than 2 cars. So that's just sort of a flip side in terms of what could be done at the same time to help offset equal sides of the problem. But then also to talk about that corner is such a stormwater problem that we have to deal with stormwater pretty seriously.
It's the lowest part of the site. It's where all the water is going to go no matter what we do forever. And coming out of that corner, there's a whole drainage swale that goes beyond there. And so it is an attractive site plan target, no doubt, but it just so happens to be where all the water on this
One of the
site is gonna
problems,
go.
with that area is, although historically we could be allowed to discharge a little bit to the north, which would be the left of the page from that spot, we've been advised not to do that. And so we're going to try to treat as much of the stormwater in that area on site as possible so that we don't have to discharge.
As not only not a landscape architect, but as someone who cannot grow anything, we're going to be digging basements for the parking. So, if the issue is that that's a sunken area, could that not be filled with the earth that we're excavating from other things to bring it up, to put something on top?
We're saying we want it to be a sunken area.
Oh, you want it to be to
there's-
process.
Part of the stormwater strategy.
It's the natural,
understand.
it's the natural low
But
point.
we're also saying it's a known stormwater problem area,
Understood.
The other thing I'd
leading
add,
to the neighbors and the off-site discharge.
And there's
and the
adjacent-
potential legal issues related to that.
There's adjacent topography and property lines that are right there that we have to match and meet and deal with retaining walls and other kinds of existing components that are off-site our property.
Okay, so let's move past this. The question is, is council supportive of this 50-50 that we're shooting for at this time as opposed to 100%?
Yes, that's the question.
Underground. That's the crux of the question for us
Yes.
tonight. And notwithstanding that we would like to figure out management and also gaining back units. Okay, so that's the question to you. 50-50 over 100%?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
It's a no-brainer.
All right,
Thank you.
let's move on.
okay.
Okay, this one will probably snowball into a couple more things in terms of unit count, is the height, but we'd like to focus on the height issue. And, you know, if in your head, the unit count issue is more than the height along 82, that might steer where you fall on this line. But what we have presented is where we think building height is most impactful when you're crossing by the site, when you're walking on the site. And so this is one strategy to deal with it. We've tried to inherently address it in the building design in the 310 scheme, but wanted to ask that question of, are we hitting it with height reduction, with sense of height, or is this a hurdle we need to keep addressing?
Okay.
Yeah, I honestly, when I first looked at the renderings, I wasn't sure which one was 3 and 4 stories. I appreciate you guys, trying to step it back in that, but it kind of looked just like a different color variation more than anything. When you actually stop and look, you realize that, oh, those are set back, and there's that little bit more of Deer Hill. So, at a higher degree of scrutiny, those things stand out. But at first blush, I mean, how you'd see it from the highway, I don't notice a difference really at all. It feels like a really high price to pay in terms of unit count for a marginal, if noticeable, distinction in the aesthetic and outdoor spaces that, I mean, I love the idea of these. I really do. But I think being where they are, I question if they'll even be used. But I appreciate the effort.
Okay.
I do.
I think in building 1 and 3, if we add those fourth floor elements back, can we get 14 more units?
That's right.
Correct.
And I think driving up Highway 82, you should be looking at the road, not Deer Hill. And I'd rather house people.
Okay.
I'll agree with what's been said. I didn't see a tremendous amount of difference between the two. And I agree losing that many units is unappealing.
I wonder, okay, so when it comes to the height perception, I do think it makes an improvement. But for me, what really drives this is just about the livability and the noise. So that's something that I don't know sitting here. Skippy and Chris were sharing stories of soundproofing that's been going on, so it may not be an issue, but if it was an issue, then I would support not having them there if those are going to be the ones that are going to be taking the brunt of that. So what you're hearing at this table is that we're not really wanting to lose 14 four-story units. I would, in the spirit of that middle ground, I wonder about softening the ends of the building. If 1-2 units at the ends of the building makes a difference for that height perception and massing. So I throw that back at you.
Yep. We could certainly study that. So what that would do, it'd be the 266 plus 14, right? So if I did my math right, that's 280.
That's a 280.
So it would be a 280 unit approach based on the footprint associated. And I know we've got 3 or 4 more, maybe 5 more of these inflection points to go through, but just for this point, it'd be the elbow room scheme, 280 units.
Yep.
Okay.
Stay the course gets the vote.
Well, it's actually, it's the elbow room scheme.
Well,
that
sorry,
footprint
on
plus-
that slide.
It's that section.
That section
Yeah,
gets
yeah.
the vote.
Okay,
Thanks, guys.
trails.
Very helpful.
This is, going back one slide, this is really outside the box here, but looking at the stay the course, the left units, could you dig down a little bit more? Bring down another half story for the building would be 3.5 stories high instead of 4 stories?
Sinking the buildings.
Your accessibility gets destroyed.
That like entrance thing that we're trying to.
Yeah.
That and balancing the cut and fill on site, that's a big dollar one. The basements already kind of help balance the site, but as soon as you go down another half a story, then we're out of balance. We're trucking dirt off the site likely, I think, in that scenario.
But then all of your access to the buildings has to deal with ADA. So it's a practice that was commonly used. We see that. It's more difficult these days.
I think that we've consistently always shown the buildings so that there was positive drainage away in all the schemes that we've presented, all the 4 different alternatives. And we did that on purpose, just recognizing the climate, recognizing the reality. And so I'd feel like we're kind of ignoring a bunch of things that we've paid a lot of attention to by doing. I appreciate and understand why you would just put that on the table.
Yeah, appreciate the idea.
But I think that operationally and also just the quality of life in those ground floor units might be diminished by that.
There's a lot of reasons why, we see that building practice as something that was done, and it was done for reasons, but there's also reasons why that building practice is done less and less nowadays. We have to waterproof the parking garage anyway, right? And so by putting the units more down, we can waterproof those details today. We can do that. It's not something we love to do because you still run the risk of water infiltration into livable area. But there's also the ADA, there's also the other issues. So it adds up to, it's kind of less and less done, less light in those buildings for numerous reasons.
Okay.
Wouldn't it add to stormwater costs as well? Drainage issues?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but it's possible.
I'm not sure that it would add to the stormwater, but it would just create some, it probably would, because it would be extra piping and extra drains and things that, could clog. And,
Right.
it's operationally, I would be concerned that we'd have, every single ground floor unit would be a potential source of water intrusion into the apartment, as opposed to the way we've got it organized now, that everything is absolutely positive draining away.
Well, we know we have enough sanitary sewer drainage as well. We probably still would, but it does introduce the possibility that in some places we'd need ejector pumps. So you start layering on the complication, and it's.
Yeah, we had to buy some pumps for BG2, I think. Yeah, thank you for entertaining that thought.
Sure. So we go to trails.
Yeah, so a big part of the guiding principle that was spoken by Rhodesy here was pedestrian friendliness and connections. So brings us back to the trails. And we are asking you on the trails if you are okay with the 3-way split that we are showing here. This has been vetted by the Parks Department. Thanks for taking that on. And so just as a reminder, the trail that's being called out as the Aspen ABC Trail that runs parallel to 82 would be the sort of the commuter trail that people could open up their e-bikes to the maximum speed. The top trail, called the Annie Mitchell Spur, would get people from Aspen up to the Annie Mitchell area and some of the other affordable housing complexes and to the east of the Lumberyard.
Those two exist currently?
The existing trail, yes, they do exist today. Yes, basically. It would need to be modified.
Needs to be modified.
By our new layout.
No, I understand that, but there currently is
Yes,
that split
that is correct,
around
yes.
the property.
Yes.
Yes.
now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
So the only additional in here really is the midline.
The midline, yeah, the midline, which is sort of the, I don't mind taking my time and engaging with the population and, strolling around or moving at a
terminus.
decent speed. What?
The terminus.
And
For people getting
Yeah,
in and
that's
out
right.
of the bike trail system from
That
this
live here.
facility, it provides
here,
that
yeah.
connection. Now, I've talked a lot with Matt Kuhn, Director of Parks. That entrance where the crossing is at grade, at a minimum needs to be improved over the current condition. Right now, it goes straight across the driveway. More than likely, we're going to want to see that as a raised crossing. But we also still, and Matt and I kind of have talked this through, we also think that we should continue to work together with Parks and Trails to, we haven't had the opportunity to fully engineer a subgrade crossing. And we looked at trying to relocate that crossing that would better facilitate it. And we haven't had a lot of success finding a better location for that underground crossing. And I want to try to continue to, research the possibility of it engineering a subgrade crossing there. We're just at this point almost sort of settling in this plan for leaving it as an at-grade crossing, but an improved at-grade crossing. But with the notion that we should continue to research trying to underground that, it's going to require retaining walls, more like you see at the Truscott subgrade crossing, where you've got these big retaining walls, and something more than we've been able to kind of engineer to this point for the housing project. But I think, if there's a way that we could somehow continue to move this project forward, but also continue to consider how we might do a subgrade crossing here, I was hoping that there would be a way to be able to have it both ways.
Is there an alternative? Are you asking us this?
no, we're asking you, A, you're okay with the three-way split as shown? And B, do you want us to continue to pursue the option of going underground for that crossing for the Aspen ABC trail? Or are you satisfied that that crossing at grade is sufficient?
And an alternative, or an option, would be to take out the middle route. I mean, we want to
No.
maintain the commuter route along 82, and the Annie Mitchell spur is going to stay feeding the backside in Annie Mitchell. So if we said no, we don't like this, the real question here is about the internal.
So the alternative to what we show would be that folks would get on the street and ride their bicycles on the street and have adequate, reasonable connections out to the trails and not have a defined approach bike trail inside the site. So we're trying to promote this idea of a bike trail inside the site. And so, yes, the saying no, we don't like the three-way split, it would be that we would have to then remove this interior trail.
Yeah, it would go from that 8 to 10 foot wide trail just to a 5-foot trail.
And the bikes would be on the street.
Can you put your cursor where you're talking about? Is that the?
So
Just
so
that-
there would be a sidewalk here no matter what, but what we're proposing is a wider,
Sort of like a
So-
multi-use 8-foot
Yeah.
wide trail.
Where are you talking about the underpass, Chris?
Right at
Right
the
here, the
intersection.
entrance.
Just for that way?
Just
Yeah,
right there.
just for the-
Just
Okay,
right
that's what I
there.
thought.
Just right.
Commuters,
Yeah,
ripping at 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or whatever, the maximum your e-bike
my
can go.
office was at the ABC, and I oftentimes use that Annie Mitchell, and a lot of times the one next to 82. I think if I lived there, I would be getting into the middle trail to get access. That's the main entrance into the housing, is that crux for underground. From a pure usage, I would use the center trail. I think that's a good option, but I can see that I know the Truscott undercrossing and those retaining walls. I know it makes it easier to bicycle through there, but that area that you're talking about is the main entrance to the whole lumberyard, and there's gonna be a lot of traffic, relatively a lot of traffic going through there. So I think from a usage standpoint, I would probably go to the center road if I was coming from town, at that little pond area that I would, if there's an easier transition into the middle route, that's probably where I would go. But I see the danger point at that intersection because everybody entering is going to be coming through there. So I guess what I'm saying is I would entertain an undergrade parking or bicycle through there, but if I lived there, I'd probably be taking the middle route.
Do you have
No, the trails here have improved so much, design to design. I think this is a big step forward. I love the distinction between the commuter trail and the community trail. And I think we need to be mindful that we are all also looking at EOTC, a $20+ million project to try and have an e-bike highway that doesn't just serve this community, but gets people off the road earlier downstream. And if that's successful, I can see the giant parking lot of actual e-bike traffic stuck at that thing. So I think that underground there is actually really important.
Thanks.
I'm for the three-way split, and that intersection right now is already dangerous. It's going to get worse when more people are living here. I'm for undergrounding that section of trail.
Thank you for bringing that up,
In
guys.
terms of the traffic, we saw the preliminary results from the transportation study. It does say that there will be, that at full build-out, this facility is going to generate 60 more automobile trips per day. 60 compared to what it is in the current condition, right? So it's a considerable number of additional automobile trips, which can be further reduced, though, by having the shuttle services that we'll talk about at 100%, and by increasing the transportation alternative options that you overlay to this community. So 60 being the most automobile trips, right, based on the engineering calculation, the ITE standards that they use, right, for those calculations, but which can be affected and potentially reduced through further transportation alternatives. So, at a minimum, we'll be making improvements to that crossing, and we can also do things to reduce those number of automobile trips.
Can I ask a question? Chris, about that 60 additional vehicle trip, is that number based on the finding that the lumberyard as it currently works has a lot of car generation, there's a lot of customers? Is it based on the fact that we think a significant number of the people who will be living here already live down valley and drive, or both, and kind of in what ratio?
So it's based specifically on the number of trips generated in the current condition, right? Subtracted from the number of trips generated in the future full build-out condition. The number of trips generated in the future full build-out condition is required by the city's under the city's transportation impact analysis requirements to be based on the ITE engineer ITE calculation, right? So it's the International Transportation Engineering Standards. So it has nothing to do with how many people will be relocating from down valley, up valley, et cetera. It's based on the specific requirements of the calculation.
What's happening there now?
It's based on the accepted engineering standards for mid-rise multifamily.
So we may find that 60 number ends up being a negative in real terms, because part of the condition today that we're not accounting for, it sounds like, may be that, there's 300 car trips from Carbondale right now from people that won't need to drive from there.
And the preliminary findings from the transportation study say that you have an effect on what that might be by providing further transportation alternatives.
Yeah. Unrelated, but yeah.
directly
Not,
impacts the
not
number of
unrelated,
trips.
but not the same thing, I should say. They're definitely related.
You've already heard from 3 members up here that looking further into the underpass is something that is accepted, and that, yes, the 3-way split is also something that we want to keep pursuing. My opinion on it is this is another area where I'm not an expert. These are things that are done by experts in transit, traffic, and mobility. So I personally, I don't necessarily, I don't see the necessity for the middle to be a bike trail, but I defer, because these are questions that are really answered by people that know how this works best, and I'm not one of those people. So, can we go to the next inflection point?
Yes,
Definitely.
please.
So we've talked about how we've assembled the building blocks of the aesthetic, that direction of mountain modern, expressing our sustainability, and then looking at how our color and material palette kind of blend in with Deer Hill and just the larger natural context. So this is, I think we said before, by no means a final design. This is an idea, and really want to know that, is this general idea with development the right direction moving forward?
Yes.
I wish I could be that brief. This is such a big improvement over where we started, guys. This is really awesome. I love what you've done. I feel like the bone structure is great. Not so sure about the makeup yet. And so just the materiality, right? Like, I mean, it comes across, I know that the bottom tiles indicate it's not that, but it still comes across as like wood that's been painted, right? So sort of that same way that we talked about, like, let solar be solar, like, let the natural materials be the natural materials. I think really leaning into that wood, some of that, Austrian Alpine like stuff that we talked about, I think is important. Did any of you guys get a chance to go by that little triad of houses I mentioned?
We need to get the address, and because we were all
got
of us
pictures
were, so we're going
You know
to
which
do
one I'm
that.
talking about?
We're going to do that.
I think that tells the story better than I can here, but it's 3 houses that I don't know if they were developed by the same person, but it sure looks like it. Looks like they had the same theory, but the materiality just got better each time, and by the time you get to the end, you're like, wow, that's really stunning. So I just push you to really lean into those natural materials, but you guys have done so much with this.
Okay, good.
What are your thoughts on the green? I think the green was a specific tie back into Deer Hill, and there's no way to do that naturally. We're open to anything, but wanted your thoughts given your feedback on that.
Yeah, imagine if it was all wood.
Yeah.
You'd start to get that Austrian
Yeah.
precedent imagery that we were showing you.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we're trying to do that tie back to
I
Deer Hill.
don't want to give you contradictory feedback that confuses my point. So I will say, of the sort of finished painted facade colors there, I think the green is the most pleasing. Like, green is always sort of that, more than the other ones. But I would really encourage us to focus on naturals. One example maybe of something that could relate to the green that stands out for me. Go with me. The library in Basalt has that entrance that appears to be all copper.
It's patinaed copper.
Right.
Yeah.
So it actually is copper, and it's beautiful, and it just conveys this immense presence and sense of quality. But I was recently was it in Taos or Big Sky? I was at one other mountain. They had a very similar entrance. I was like, wow, it's so beautiful. And I got up close, and it wasn't copper. It was a tile that was made to look like that. So it conveyed the sort of gravitas of that natural material without being it. So maybe there's something equivalent for the green there, where it doesn't have to be a actual like side of a tree. But
No, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the ongoing maintenance is really important to me. So the color palette, I'm fine with the color palette, but, wood, I have a cedar house, and wood takes maintenance. And I think ongoing maintenance in durability is really high on my list.
Understood.
Cedar's
High on our
work.
list, too.
Next.
And I think you guys are on the right path.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Exterior access.
So On exterior access, we just wanted to make sure that the ideas that we've been talking about related to the ground floor, opportunities for exterior connection. Obviously, there's double-loaded corridors that are all providing interior access. Again, that's 100% accessible. All the upper floors are accessible by elevators. In the elbow room scheme, we showed the possibility of this additional exterior entry opportunity at the 4th floor. But just in general, this idea of a combination of interior and exterior access to the apartments, to the units, is that acceptable?
And then knowing your feedback on the 4th floor step back, obviously this is not the correct graphic.
Well, it's just the idea that it's still going to have the ground floor. All the ground floor units will have that opportunity to get an indoor-outdoor connection, but the remainder of the apartments would be accessed from the double-loaded corridor interior.
Yeah, I mean, I guess of all the things that you guys have pulled units back for, this one to me has the biggest payoff in quality of life. Not only because the community clearly spoke that they like the outdoor access, but if I think of Burlingame, you know, I mean, we're not going to have so many kids playing outside, but the interaction between community members you could see being substantially improved, and the connectivity in the community. Yep. So I do see this conveying real benefits, but I would say, you know, for me, this project is already so compromised in unit count that, you know, as much as we can do to improve that situation without reducing bedrooms is huge, because yeah, the quality of life matters, but like we also have to have a community to live here. So, but I do really see the benefits to this. I do.
John?
Yeah, I agree. I like what you've done with the elbow room, increased livability, which is one of the guiding principles of what we're trying to accomplish.
Ward? Exterior entrance on the ground floor?
Well, exterior entrance on the ground floor, yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. And what you're showing here is exterior stairway going up to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor, correct?
So that's the corridor that happens at each floor. So the yellow line represents it just is letting you know at each of those 1st, 2nd, 3rd floor, there's a hallway. You have an interior corridor. That's how you get into your apartment. On the ground floor, you also have the opportunity to get access to your apartment directly from the exterior.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay? Thank you.
All right, now the biggies. Unit mix.
So Chris, you were going to
Chris,
go
you're
through this
teed
one.
up for this one?
Yeah. Let me bring that up on my screen so I can see it a little more. So obviously the 310 unit plan, 310 units, the 266, obviously 266. But the bedroom count in the 310 plan is 492 bedrooms, and the bedroom count in the 266 plan is 436 bedrooms. But, you know, there may be a little more wiggle room than Sarah even brought up, because Charlie's going to kill me. We keep talking about unit count, unit count, unit count, unit count. And we still aren't talking about bedroom count.
Right, which is the thing that matters.
Right? And so, if we are looking at a situation where you can agree to go with the elbow room with the exception of the changes to the 4th level, right, which would bring 14 units back into the elbow room plan, there could be further opportunity to take some of those 14 units and make them all 1-bedrooms. And look at which buildings that occurs in and make decisions about where that would be most appropriate to do. That would change your bedroom mix a little bit, but probably not by a lot. But it could get you from the 288?
280. We got 266 plus 14, that was 280.
Okay.
That's the elbow room scheme plus
got
the
280.
14 added back.
And you could probably eke out a couple of more units and be up to maybe 284 or something with the same number of bedrooms. right? And so just throwing that out as a possibility while we're finding middle ground, you know, that would cause us to have to look at, okay, how many 2 bedrooms are you left with? How many 3 bedrooms are you left with? And is that viable? Because I know in building 3, for example, we were running low on 3 bedrooms, and we might not want to take out 3s in the building 3. So we would have to pick and choose where to make those choices. But we could probably eke out a few more units by converting a couple of 2s to 1s maybe, keep the same bedroom count, if you will, and help you with unit count, if that matters. Or you might say, no, we want to kind of keep the ratios the same. So I think that's just another bit of wiggle room that we might be able to offer the team to work within for you.
This specific inflection point is all about the mix and the appropriateness of the mix. And we've told the stories and shared the information about the feedback with the EPS and those relationships. But just as now where we sit with these in front of you and considering what Chris just put on the table, do we have your approval to proceed? And obviously it'd be most beneficial for us to have a very clear direction, so over the next 6 weeks we're focused on something that we all have a general picture of.
Yeah.
Question? Chris, I really appreciate you bringing it to bedroom count, because it's not about the number of units. I mean, to me, it's really about the human count, right? Like how many actual people
Yes.
are going to be there. And so, yeah, the unit count's a leading indicator, but it's not really the end result. And I'm wondering, I would think you would get, because you're sharing the common space, you know, you get more people in a 3-bedroom than you do 3 1-bedrooms per square foot. But do we know about, like, the use? Like, is it the case, for instance, that an average 1-bedroom has 1.8 occupants, but an average 3 per bedroom, but an average 3-bedroom has 1.1 per bedroom? Do we know that?
We do. Yeah, there's some statistics that Chris was able to get a hold of.
I don't need the answers
Yeah,
now.
but yes,
I'm
is
just
the
like, I
answer.
really appreciate Chris bringing that up. And I guess whatever the direction is here, you know, my interest is the mix that will get us the most human beings who are part of our community, more than the unit count.
Yeah, I'm thinking primarily the 4th floor on building 3, which is a for sale unit, and what the demand is for 1, 2, and 3. I think the demand was a lot lower for 3 than it is 1 and 2. So if we can tweak that ratio on 1 and 2 bedrooms, if that corresponds with what the demand is for sale units, if we can get one or 2 more units, maybe 1 more unit, 2 more units on that 10 count on the 4th floor, by changing the number of bedrooms that are on in those units, just following your suggestion, Chris.
You can do that.
It's probably only going to yield like a couple little points, but we're in that fine tuning.
And I think towards point, like what the market was saying is building 3, we need a few 3 bedrooms. And potentially we can gain that back once we look at that, taking that back road out and what that looks like in a little more detail. So can't say for sure one way or another right now, but.
Chris, you probably have this on top of your head, just the demand for the sale units. Is it a higher demand for 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms? Is it similar that 1 and 2 is the highest demand and lower demand on a 3?
If you look at the number of bids on resales, which is not a perfect metric to look at because you only get data on what resold, right? But when we do look at that, what we find is that at the upper categories, there's more demand for the larger units, and at the lower categories, there's more demand for the lower units, for the smaller units. So it kind of goes opposite of the income levels.
The income levels we're looking on this we're not looking for ROs or fives, we're looking for 2, 3, and
Twos and threes,
maybe
yeah.
some fours.
Smattering of fours.
Yeah, if we can match the demand and categories and maybe get an extra unit or two on that building 3, 4th floor, that would be good.
Can we leave that as an administrative exercise? We understand that you want us to put the 4th floors back, and we'll work with the design team.
Yeah, fourth floor's back.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I don't want us to get too far into the weeds
Yeah.
here. Thanks.
Oh, we're in the weeds.
Well, but that's a whole new level of it.
This is nothing but weedy.
Now legal.
Okay, is that enough information on that topic? Do you need?
I don't know if John was going to chime in. Or?
I just had a quick comment. I'm glad you guys have some wiggle room, and I'm glad we're looking at the differences, but for me, the room count is more important than the unit count.
Okay.
Bedroom count.
Human
You
count.
guys are nodding as well, so
Yeah, human count.
human count.
The next level up, right? Because I want to be mindful if there's a big difference in
Right.
bedroom utilization between different size units, that we take that into account.
Yeah, if there are more people that can be 1 and 2 bedrooms than a couple of 3 bedrooms, I'd rather go with the 1 and 2 bedrooms.
Yes.
I do think that we're kind of getting down to the level of detail where not much of this is going to really be moving the needle a lot at this stage. But it's good to hear. We want to hear more of this.
The only thing that I want to add on to this conversation is about location. As we were going through the presentation tonight, I was wondering about, those 2 buildings being thought of as rental and a building being thought of as ownership. Where would those 3-bedroom units land? Are they more, are they split across? Are they better served on ground floor level for 3-bedroom units, and that kind of thing? So I'm comfortable, again, with the experts programming what that looks like, because I could only make guesses as to say like, I think that maybe all your family units should be in an area kind of together, but maybe that's not correct. Maybe it's better actually to blend them and mix. I don't know these things, but what you've shown and represented as initial mix counts, I'm fine with that. I would just ask that you think about that as we go forward.
And we'll spend more time talking about the implications and just when we show the 100% plans, and we'll have the mixes associated with that and just explain, and we could do a calculation related, this is how many people. Based on the bedroom count in this building, this is how many people we're talking about here. So you could see if a particular building seems like it's more oriented in one direction or not. My experience would say that this would be, you would mix all these unit types around, because you never know. You never know what somebody's preference, what a particular family's preference is going to be. Your idea about putting 3 bedrooms on the ground floor, that's happens a lot, and so we could certainly take that into account, and we have. Part of the issue with the modulars is the stacking approach, but to the degree that we can get most of our larger family units, at least if not on the ground floor, maybe the 2nd floor. So the minimum amount of going up, all the way up, and be able to maybe take the stairs off the 2nd floor down and out, those kind of things, they matter.
Right.
This makes a big difference in livability.
Okay.
Just one other piece I want you guys to hear. I know we're not choosing categories tonight, but Ward mentioned, for me, I really see this as a lower category project. We have a need in all the categories. I think there are better tools to deliver those higher category units. I really think of this as primary category 1 and 2 with maybe some 3. And I understand the argument of like, well, we don't really do 1 because there's not a big demand for it. And candidly, I think Rachel was talking about starting wage at the Wendy's in Glenwood now is like $400 shy of category 2. So I realize there's not going to be category 1 jobs in our current buckets, but all category 1 means to me is the lowest income strata of jobs available. I guarantee by the time this project is up, we will have bumped those incomes, and the people at the lowest end of our economic strata in our workforce are the ones that are most struggling to find housing. So I want this to be a place for them. So we just think about that more than category 1 equals 38, and so therefore there's no need for it.
Fair enough.
Okay?
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Unit count.
So the next inflection point's unit count, and so we just actually
Human count.
talked about
Human
that a
counts.
lot. So I understand the direction, and just to confirm that we're going to focus on the elbow room scheme plus the 14, and with the items that Chris was mentioning, those kind of potential variations on that, that's what we understand as our direction. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, thank you.
Which is really the next page,
Yeah.
kind of
I'm sorry.
pulling it all together.
Oh, so, thank you. All right, so this is just our recommendation. So when we prepared this, and just like we've said before, the whole idea that this would be a stable, thriving, affordable neighborhood that's pedestrian-friendly, environmentally sustainable, connected, and welcoming, that looks, lives, and feels authentically Aspen. We really feel like where we're at with what we've presented is arriving at that. It's going in that direction. So we recommend proceeding with the elbow room scheme, which results in a reduced unit count, and there's associated reduced parking. That's a part of that. We believe that the long-term livability, the quality of life for all the future Lumberyard residents will be enhanced with that approach. And we think that this makes a significant impact on the local affordable housing crisis. So that's our recommendation to you. And thank you for all the excellent feedback tonight. I think we have very clear direction related to next steps, and so that we can really pull together a terrific 100% package for you over the next 6 weeks. Yes, John?
I don't know, we talked through, we've got like really good alignment on the trails and the forest store and we're making progress, but it just feels like we kind of just blazed through that last slide about, yeah, we want the elbow room without the fourth floor. And I mean, I certainly don't feel that way, you know.
We could go back to that. We
Yeah,
could go back
I
to
mean,
that. Sorry, I apologize for making it sound that way.
That's okay, and that very well may be the direction, so you may be correct, but I just, you know, before you guys got here, like I just already view this project as so much less in terms of human count than it could have been, and there might be good reason for that. My interest is not in just density for density's sake, but you know, I guess when I'm looking at this, what I'm saying is, I think that there are elements of why you moved to the elbow room that have merit. So that ground access, that connectivity, some of the sun issues, that's great. But I'm not signing off on, well, let's just, you know, cut the other 30 units. I'm saying if we can get some of those benefits, but with, you know, eliminating as few units as is possible and working on that mix that Chris suggested to at least have the human count be the same, then like, okay, then I think that those quality of life things have merit. But I hope I'm not like guillotining, you know, 60 humans out of our community, because if you're not here, you know, barring some other work, which I hope will be successful, but we don't have guarantee to, like, it's pretty much SOL and, you know, see you in some other state. So I just want to be mindful of that.
Okay, I think I think we're all mindful of it.
I know.
I think we all would like to create and stabilize our housing as much as possible. I also agree with some of the things that you said. If there were other opportunities for adding units back, I look at the carports and I wonder if there's even the ability to put units above carports, pull under parking and stuff like that. So I agree with what you're saying, Skippy. I just don't want the characterization that we are, you know, cutting people out or saying sayonara, down the road you go. That's not the sentiment that's coming from me. So I don't want it to be characterized like that.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying.
And I know we're doing so much work across the spectrum, not just on this project, in a bunch of areas. I know we all get it. I know we all deeply care. And I know that there's trade-offs in every project. So I'm certainly not saying anything. I know how dire it is out there, and I know how it will feel. To Tori's, you know, point about carports, and I don't know if that's possible, but perhaps that same thought that I had for well, Tori had as well for that corner. Maybe we can't do it in that corner, but, maybe there's some, units where there's, the 100%, car free, and those are sort of the shared bike ports or whatever, and there's a small bank of units that are car free by design along the edge, and that helps us get back some units. I mean, I don't know, but if that's something that's a possibility, by all means,
It's not possible without major redesign of numerous different areas of the site.
So I
That's
think
what we're trying to say.
the reason that Chris went through the detailed explanation of the analysis that we performed, and really the reason that we did those 4 very different parking analysis, it was to show 4 very different building types and spreading them around the site in different configurations. And I'm sorry that we somehow haven't convinced you yet that all the factors, when we look at everything and we try to graphically illustrate it, it's apparent to you that there's still some opportunity that we haven't investigated. And I just want to emphasize that the underlying purpose of all those different studies was to help really investigate, exhaust those different approaches. And then that great comparison matrix that we went through, and we felt at the time when we landed on pursuing the direction that we pursued it was clear that there was a particular approach that solved more of those things than the others. So I apologize for somehow at this point still that we're not convincing you enough that, sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm not comfortable with these folks having to apologize.
Yeah, I don't think that's at
I
all
think that what
necessary.
you've done, actually, what you've done is you've ridden this team, and you've ridden your prior conceptual design team like bare, right? I mean, you looked at, as low as 140 units up to 500 plus units, and spent a lot of time working together, working through your individual differences of opinion to a point where you're now compromising on, small details that matter, but again, they're not big course adjustments in where we're going. There is still time in this process to work out lots of details on management, on policies. We got to talk about dogs, no dogs, or how dogs. We've got hours to spend, okay? We have to talk about how exactly we want to try to implement the ownership, because we actually have a couple of alternatives in how we might implement the ownership. We have to talk about what conditions you may or may not want to write into the approval ordinance that allows future flexibility of some kind. There's a lot of stuff still to work on this project. There's a long way to go. We're in like the second inning. And to get here, there's been a lot of decision-making that it's been my job, our job, to try to inform you as much as possible. And if at any point in time, you're trying to make decisions and you don't feel informed enough, that's a failure of my part. But I think you've ridden this team to get as much out of them as you possibly can, trying to squeeze as much into the most dense, the most number of units, the biggest and most expensive housing project that the city has ever undertaken. Yeah. So I think you should be proud of the work that you've done to this point. I think it's been very comprehensive, right? We've left no stone unturned, and yet we still have so much more to do. And so I appreciate lamenting the notion that we need more housing. It's a housing crisis, right? And you've done everything you can to this point to try to do as much as possible, as much as responsibly possible at this site. And trying to also balance what you're hearing from the community coming from outside while doing that at the same time. So not a simplistic task, right? And so given this team the direction that they have to move forward to get to 100% schematic design, I think you've given them the direction that they need to continue with the remaining work. We did look at the timeline. We are not exactly on schedule, right? We've been pushing out a little bit, not enough to ruin the project, of course, right? But we do need to continue to stay the course on the timeline, because if we don't deliver units to the community, then all of the good intentions fall by the wayside, right? So we have to continue to do good work. There were 2 good choices on the table today, and you're actually coming away with a 3rd good choice out of those, right?
And I just want to say, like, you guys owe no apologies, nor does staff. I mean, you guys have done really good work that you should be proud of. And you have a very difficult task of dealing with 5 very opinionated people with different life experiences and expectations. And yeah, sometimes in that process, naturally things get brought up, and one of us may have a different idea of what is or isn't coming back. And then when we see an opportunity of, oh, maybe that could come back, we may jump in. That's not a reflection of your work. But, you know, I mean,
I'm really happy with where we are now. I think the open space, the larger buildings instead of a bunch of smaller buildings. I do have regrets, and the regrets are that we have 4-story buildings. And I think that I particularly think of John McBride and what he's put into this community and how much he objects to the size, mass and scale of these buildings. But I weigh that against what our needs are, what our community needs are, and balance that with the density and the livability and quality of life. And I think we're at a place that I'm proud of. I want to move forward with this. I hear a steel door closing down the hall. We can put the number of units and the parking 50-50 mix in and proceed. And I know that we're always going to come up short in some way, but we're always going to be over in others. And I feel comfortable where we've been and look forward to going forward. And thank you.
Thank you, Ward.
Thanks, Ward. That means a lot.
Yeah, as the newest member here on council, when I read this week's packet about tonight's meeting, I realized how much had been done before I got here, because this has been going on for over 2 years since before I joined council. And as I read through it, it just seemed, it looked like a lot of different things had been suggested and some implemented and some thrown out. And it seems very obvious how we got to where we are today. And I want to thank all you guys and Rachel for guiding us as far as we've come, and Chris's leadership and Sarah's. I think we're heading in the right direction, and I think you guys have done a great job.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be back on May 16th, and we'll have a lot more detail and a lot more refinement of the things that we talked about.
But no units on carports.
Right, right.
So we've got to stick with the buildings we've got. We're there.
And I just want to say that we take this responsibility very seriously. We recognize that this project is going to make a big difference for thousands of people. And the kind of leadership that you all are exhibiting is something that I hope that other communities pay attention and recognize that this kind of focus and this kind of preparation to solve this kind of a problem is what many, many more cities need to be doing. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for us to help do this.
Council members, you did hear May 16th, so we've adjusted the schedule to try to stay on the original timeline and compress some things. So Cushing Tower Hall has been amazing coming back for us tonight. I really appreciate that from this team, all of you for that. And then from a scheduling standpoint, we'll talk about May 16th. You have 3 major items all on the same night, so we're going to ask you to consider starting earlier, like maybe 2 o'clock.
9 a.m., got it, okay.
So, well, you have this, you have moratorium code, this moratorium code review, as well as the Armory public input that you requested that come back to you for you to determine the proposed scope for RFPing on that space. So
Maybe we tighten those "we reviewed these before" slides.
We're not very good at throttling ourselves.
Yeah.
No, I think we're going to have, we'll try to put together a concise, rapid presentation for you.
Thank you.
And I think the packet that you'll get beforehand will have you in a great prepared position to be able to see things that are familiar, and you'll see refinements. So hopefully it'll be straightforward.
Well, and we'll have some more details too, though, because we are going to have some air quality study results, some transportation impact analysis results. So we will probably need some time to focus on those things too. So hopefully
I'm
the
gonna get
design
on-
part will be the easiest part, maybe.
I'm going to get on the internet, look for a cat herding hat for you.
I already
So
got one.
curious to see what comes up when you
Do
search
it every
that.
day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Woo!
Out of here.
Jayhawk, sorry, Michael Jordan. Oh, no.
Oh, no, sorry,
Sarah
Jim.
just say?
She said the game is in progress.
Yeah. Only 5? Come on,
Thank you, guys.
it's not gonna get you very far.